Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome again to another epic episode of Abdullah Simia. I'm joined today by my special guest, Abdullah Gondal. Abdullah Gondal, you probably all know him and you've already heard about him, but if not, he's a Pakistani ex-Muslim, lives in Canada now. Abdullah Gondal is also a student of neuroscience. So because of this studies that he's doing and this research that he's learning, we have a really unique opportunity. We have an opportunity from a former believer, someone who knows the Islamic creed, the Islamic belief, who has gone on the other side of the fence and is now, you can say what, an apostate, disbeliever, murtad, but looking at it from both sides of the fence. So we have a unique opportunity here. Abdullah Gondal, how's it going?
Hey, how's it going, everybody? Assalamu alaikum, Eid Mubarak, happy belated Ramadan. It's been a while. Thanks for having me on your show again. Like you said, today's a big topic we're addressing. We're going into the deep end of things with the neuroscience of prophethood and analyzing Muhammad. And this has been alleged about his condition and many famous people in history throughout. And I felt like the theory that he could have been possibly suffering from temporal lobe epilepsy has an insane amount of evidence behind it. And when I say it has a lot of evidence, I mean all of the evidence is combined by Muslim scholars in their own books, and this is precise symptomology. So the goal of today's presentation is to firstly dispel myths about what epilepsy is and the general misconceptions among the public. Then we will go through a little bit about what academia sees epilepsy as and how it sees the history of epilepsy and in famous people. Then eventually we will get to Muhammad's childhood, his conditions during revelation. Now, mind you, those are embarrassing. Muhammad receiving those revelations. If you're Muslim, I'm sorry. One of the disclaimers I want to let you know before we start is this presentation isn't about hurting you. I'm not forging anything. In fact, most of the material in this is opinion of other academics. But there will be hadith and narrations that will come to light that people will be unaware of, and they will be shared in a modern neuroscience light, and that might make some Muslims very uncomfortable. Again, I apologize. The point of that is not to offend you. Now, going forward, after that, we go through Muhammad's symptomology. We will also come down to the Quran and try to explain a bit of how epilepsy ties into the Quran, and in fact, the Quran could be a result directly of epilepsy.
So go ahead.
So we have about 78 slides to go through.
Before we jump into that, I just wanted to share this reaction I got for posting this on Twitter. Leave no stone unturned to get the hate you deserve for your hatred towards Islam. Talking about, neuroscience, the brain, revelation, and the intersection of them, but apparently that's considered hatred from this Pakistani guy, Institute of Certain Accountants of Pakistan. It's kind of sad to see reactions like this, but I want to make a special announcement. Today, Abdullah Gondal, at some point, is going to start his own channel. I want to support him, and I want all you guys to know all the super chats today are going to go towards Abdullah Gondal. Put a lot of time. It's almost like a second job creating this presentation. On top of the studies, on top of the work that he's doing, creating this presentation is a hell of a lot of work. So any super chats you give today will go straight to him. Abdullah Gondal, thank you so much for this. Let's get into it. I'm going to share your screen.
Okay. So before we jump into it, I just want to clarify one thing is because the purpose of this presentation is making this knowledge available to be easily understood by the general public, I am going to try to avoid using jargon or confusing neuroscience terms, nor try to get into too much detail to confuse the audience. What we will try to focus on is mostly Muhammad, so we will avoid going into details of other personality lives unless it's relevant. So let's start with this topic, the neuroscience of prophethood. Historically, we've known that prophethood has been associated with a lot of visions, apparitions, sensations these people experience, and they eventually say that they are talking to God, God is talking to them, they're the Messiah, they have to, or God is giving them letters, verses, books. This is commonly tied to epilepsy, specifically temporal lobe epilepsy, which has a high frequency of Geschwind syndrome, which is hyper-religiosity. That's just the backdrop of the argument. Now, the presentation we're going to go through is, first I want to start with general basic brain anatomy, just to explain where the lobes are, what different parts of the brain do. Then I want to explain what epilepsy is, because historically and to the general public, their understanding of epilepsy is very, very detached from reality, and is mostly guided by Hollywood movies. We'll also go about different types of seizures, which is very important, and we'll go to some symptoms of temporal epilepsy and its symptomology. But what's also important to note is the symptoms aren't exhaustive, because, like I said, we are focusing on a singular person and not going into all sorts of different symptoms of different types of epilepsy, like we'll get to in a second. The academia in case studies is very important, because this section will dispel any doubts and myths where Muslims might object that how can Muhammad, being crazy, write this book, or how can Muhammad create an empire or lead armies despite his epilepsy, or show his cognition being mostly intact throughout his life. Then the most juiciest part and the most important part, and this is where we're going to be spending most of our time, and this is again very, very interesting, would be the revelation and hallucinations of Muhammad. And I kid you not, there are literally hadiths where Muhammad would be laying on the floor, snorting like a camel, foaming at the mouth, trembling when he's getting the revelation from God. Like I said, at the end, what we will try to explain is how can the Quran, or the emergence of the Quran, be explained in the light of hypergraphia and temporal epilepsy and compulsive rhyming. We will get to that at the end. So let's start off with what is important here. So right now you're looking at a general picture of the brain, and what I want you to know is the part we're focusing on is the temporal lobes. They're located right above where your ears are, about here. And their main function is object recognition, sexual orientation, sexuality, like if you cut off the temporal lobes or damage the temporal lobes, you can sometimes recognize faces. You know, I can have capgras and a bunch of other disorders. The occipital lobe is in the back. It's the part of the brain which does visual processing. Parietal lobe, also visual processing and sense of perception in space mostly. Frontal lobe is like the executive functioning, where it's like an orchestrator, where the conductor is standing there and he's orchestrating the rest of the brain to do his job. And it's very, very important in executive higher cognitive functioning. The cerebellum, on the other hand, is like a small brain at the back of the brainstem, and it's got 4 times more neurons put together than the rest of the brain combined, and it is chiefly responsible for refining motor movements. And the brainstem goes into involuntary action like heartbeat, whatnot. Now, the key point, what I want you to take from here, is the language center is located in the temporal lobes, okay? There's in the left part of the brain, mostly. And it's the Wernicke's area and the Broca's area. So the Broca's area is mostly tied with production of speech, whereas you can emit the speech, whereas the Wernicke's area is tied with the understanding, grammar, and syntax of the speech. So what happens is if you damage the Broca's area or the Wernicke's area, you can have issues with composition of language and stuff. So sometimes,
are you saying the Quran came from the left part of the brain?
Exactly, that is a possibility. Now, if the whole idea is if a seizure was to start or affect the temporal lobe, i.e. the language center of the brain as well, what could happen is you could get something like compulsive rhyming or excessive want to, let's say, write or draw. So things like that. And it's quite possible that that is how Muhammad had an obsession with rhyming later on in his life. With this basic anatomy aside, let's get to the next slide. So now we're going to get into epilepsy, what it is. Epilepsy is a condition of the brain that causes seizures. Now, what I want you to understand is seizures are highly synchronized electrical activity in the brain. So remember that if your brains and neurons start firing at the same time, that's not good. That can cause a seizure. One of the things that you need to understand is there are many different types of seizures. Now, what is also important is seizures can start in a single part of the brain or a focus and remain there. They can start all over the brain. They can start in an isolated part of the brain and then spread to the whole brain. And then there are some seizures that have no physical signs. There might be just, unless you know the person is epileptic, they might be just appearing to you as spaced out. Or there are some psychogenic or mental seizures that are just in your head and you don't see any symptomology of it. Just to give you a small breakdown of what kind of seizures we're talking about, absent seizure, the person is spaced out, like he'll be sitting there, and if you don't know, he'll just appear like he's staring into the abyss. Myoclonic is minor muscle twitching, which may occur in a short span of time. Atonic, as in limp muscles, tonic, as in stiff muscles, and clonic is convulsions. The type you normally see in when you talk about epilepsy, what people in their head instantly imagine is tonic-clonic seizures, which are mostly shown in movies. And this creates a misconception that people think that epileptics or schizos or these people having seizures only have these type of seizures and that they're dysfunctional. So to remove this, that out of a bunch of different types, tonic-clonic is just one type of seizure.
So again, a lot of people think of seizures as a person is convulsing and shaking. And are you saying there's different types of seizures which are not as, or are we going to go through the symptoms later?
Yes. So what I'm giving you a general classification of how we classify types of seizures based on what kind of movements or symptoms they show. But like you said, we will go to specific examples later on in Mohammed's life, where we show that he's having, let's say, and I will point it out, right now he's having an absent seizure. Oh, that's the myoclonic seizure, the psychogenic, tonic-clonic. One thing also to note, though, that these terminologies changed. Before, these used to be petit mal, grand mal seizures in previous scientific literature, but that was confusing. So they changed the language and terminology. So now they're like focal onset, generalized tonic-clonic seizure. So if you do come across the older naming convention, it's the same, just the names are changed. That's all.
And one more thing I wanted to bring up, which I forgot to mention, is it's not just us. Mohammad Gilan, who is a student of neuroscience, a Muslim, he has actually acknowledged that most neuroscience students, most neuroscientists are atheists. Because why do you think that is?
Well, for me, like, we know so much about the brain at this point that the whole idea of God or prophethood or angels or God talking to us, in light of history of modern neuroscience and brain traumatic injury, it's absurd. It just makes no sense, right?
Is it a better explanation than God spoke to them? Like,
yeah, like for example, like we can, with pinpoint accuracy, we can create this one neuroscientist made this thing called the God helmet, where he used the evidence and understanding of temporal epilepsy and its implication for the temporal parietal network with religion. And he created a helmet where you could put it on atheists' heads and then make them see God or make them feel like angels are in the room. So the point is, we know with great detail where exactly in the brain or which parts of the brain are responsible for these kind of experiences.
wow.
You can even induce such experiences at will at this point.
Wow. Even drugs too, right? Like LSD.
Yeah.
Okay,
now, before we get into the details of the symptomology, what I want you to know, these are just some of the symptoms, and these are not exhaustive, because like I said, epilepsy could be of different types. We're talking about epilepsy that is affecting the temporal lobe, but there could be an occipital lobe epilepsy, it could be parietal lobe epilepsy, be frontal lobe epilepsy, be epilepsy starting in the brainstem. So those will all have different types of symptomology, and temporal epilepsy can exhibit these symptoms as shown on this screen. But again, these aren't exhaustive. Now, also need to understand that not every person with the disorder will exhibit all of these symptoms. He might exhibit some symptoms, he might exhibit some symptoms not at all. And he might have some symptoms only in specific periods or episodes of his life. So these things are very important to be kept in mind when talking about this thing. Because what's happening is we're trying to talk about a person who lived 14 centuries ago, and economics will also point this out to you, that to make a diagnosis on a person who's living 14 centuries ago with 100% accuracy and saying that, oh, I know his hallucinations were because the focal point of the seizure was in the left mesial temporal lobe and it went to this, with such precision we cannot tell, of course, without opening the person's brain or doing genetic testing. The point is that we can definitely assure with a lot of certainty, yes, there was something definitely wrong, which points towards temporal epilepsy as the most likely and tenable diagnosis. But can we be 100% sure that it was epilepsy in this lobe with this much detail and precision? Obviously not. So let's go over some symptoms. Now, one of the things you notice is writing sensation in abdominal or breastbone area, the sternum, which is called epigastric writing. This is a very common aura that precedes a seizure. Auras in general can be bright lights, visual disturbances. Sometimes, a lot of times with epilepsy, temporal epilepsy is olfactory disturbances and disturbances of smell, where people start smelling bad smell before a seizure. Lip smacking is one of them, where you're trying to, these are called automatisms, where when you're having a seizure, a lot of the times your body starts going into these rhythmic movements. So lip smacking is one of them. Staring into the abyss is an absence seizure, where normally you won't be having any tonic, clonic, or any muscle twitch. You'll be just standing there, lost in your own head and thoughts or in your own hallucination. You have auditory hallucinations, visual hallucinations, yes. Gashman syndrome, hyperreligiosity, like we will see in a second, is a very common occurrence with the religion conversion experiences as well, especially with postictal psychosis. Sweating, like I said, it's not a direct symptom, it's just anxiety, but if you're having a seizure and you're having a stress response, then seeing hyperventilation and sweating is common. Confusion and fear is very, very common. We will in fact see that this is exactly what happened to Mohammad and a bunch of other cases as well. Convulsions or rhythmic movements, we will see that with Mohammad as well. Hypergraphia is the tendency to write, express your beliefs, and generally it's an isolated drawing or writing, but if you're unlettered like Muhammad, you can exhibit that as an oral speech as well.
Assuming he actually was unlettered,
yes, exactly, right?
Yeah.
Now we also get to sleepiness or partial loss of consciousness. Now here's one thing important, that not every seizure, not every epileptic loses consciousness. In fact, there's complex partial seizures or absent seizures or psychogenic seizures that have sometimes no loss of consciousness at all, right? And the person will remember the whole experience. Now, there are also memory impairments, where we will get to how Muhammad had some of these as well. But like I said, there are different degrees and varying intensities of how much it affects you. Sometimes some people just have some short-sightedness. Some people with memory impairments might not be able to remember what they did the day before had they had food, and some might be just very demented and be struggling. But like I said, it could also happen in like episodes where you might have a cluster of seizures, and then for the next 2 weeks you had confusion and memory impairments, but then after that you were fine. And obviously with any seizure, a headache is common because of the neurotransmitter imbalance resulting from excitotoxicity and all sorts of corticosteroid depression from the seizure. Now is what is very important to understand is postictal psychosis. Many Muslims think that I'm arguing that every seizure event corresponds with a revelation event, which is not true. What you read here is firstly that people who have seizures, the seizure could have ended. They might be normal for 1 or 2 days after, but after that brief grace period, they might develop a psychosis, post-ictal psychosis. Ictal means seizure, relative to seizure. And during this psychosis could last for days and weeks or months sometimes. In the DSM, there's up to 2 months is the criteria for diagnosing it. And during this time is when a lot of epileptics will have their hallucinations, their auditory and visual hallucinations. One of the things you notice is the author is talking about delusions of grandiose, religious, and persecutory, paranoia, and aggression. Now, the aggression he references is suicidal as well. And Muhammad did try to jump off mountains. In fact, that the voices saved him before. We will get to that as well. So people with postictal psychosis are more likely to suffer visual, grandiose, religious delusions, pressured speech. Okay, just keep this in mind. Now, at the end, you see that violence can occur, and at the end, the guy gives examples of people with postictal psychosis trying to commit suicide, and that is exactly what Muhammad did when he went to the top of the mountain to try to kill himself, but he couldn't do it.
How do we know this is not just a conspiracy to undermine religion by atheist scientists? I mean,
This,
sorry, it's a dumb question, but I mean, that's what people are probably wondering.
yeah, so the thing is, like, you can literally put these people, these epileptics, right? And you can have studies on them. You can put them in MRI, and you can literally see and follow their pathology or the prognosis of their delusions. And you can also see which parts of the brain and how their epilepsy is directly, literally making them more susceptible to these kinds of hallucinations. And what's also important is, for example, with temporal epilepsy, the temporal lobes are essential for your language center, which is also tied in with your ability to project mental states onto other people, i.e., the sense of self. And this ties in directly with the idea of us being able to perceive God and whatnot. Which is the theory of mind. So people that have hindered development of theory of mind are less likely to believe in God and whatnot. So we can watch these neural networks, and if they're overstimulated, you can literally see that, okay, this person is overstimulated in this network, or he's epileptic, that's why he's becoming more religious and whatnot.
So, like, this is not just, and I think you're going to go through this, but this is not just all to discredit Muhammad. Like, there's modern examples. There's modern examples of people.
Yes.
Okay.
And this is completely independent. Like, when we go through, there's so many examples. But the point from this slide is, I'm not saying that every seizure corresponds to a revelatory event, whereas what could happen is a seizure, a group of seizures, might lead to a psychosis that might last for a month or two or a week or a few days. And in that psychosis, the person is very susceptible to hearing voices and auditory and visual hallucinations. But one thing is in postictal psychosis, most of these things occur with full consciousness. And in that psychosis, he could create multiple verses. So that's one very key important thing to remember before we get to the next section, which is the academia.
So science cannot, this is a comment, science cannot measure the supernatural. What would we expect to see if Muhammad really spoke to God? What makes you think that this is something we can talk about science with?
Well, the thing is, like, why would God even try to talk to people directly? You know, like, the whole question is weird. Like, okay, well, what if God were to talk to people? Does he have to create neurological disturbances in people that are eerily similar to epilepsy? Or why would God even not utilize a completely different, more efficient mode of communication whatsoever, right? And
it's
then why
a flawed method that we can't distinguish from
epilepsy,
like epilepsy, or, like, let's say, bad cases of people claiming to talk to God. So what we have here is Allah speaking to humans by what is now a measurable, observable mechanism that other prophets, modern prophets, claim to be speaking to God too. But according to Muhammad, Allah doesn't speak to people anymore. And according to Muslims, all of those other people are frauds except for Muhammad. So that's how we now have a problem, right? I mean, yeah. I would think if God spoke to humanity, possibly there would be no physical observance or detect, like, you wouldn't see, like, brain dysfunctions, unless, of course, if God wanted to confuse us and make it a disorder, not like a natural phenomenon.
It's the same kind of argument where Christian creationists say that God put the dinosaur fossils just to test our faith, right?
Stars,
God made the revelation very similar to epilepsy just to test our faith.
or the fact that the stars that are older than 5,000 years of, the light, more than 5,000 light years away, which is older than the young Earth universe, right?
Yeah, it just makes no sense.
So yeah, sorry, go ahead.
So one of the things before we get into the next section, this is very important for Muslims to understand, is I am not making this up. I'm not the first person to posit this as a diagnosis. In fact, as you will see, many doctors, many academics have speculated that Muhammad had complex partial seizures. And not just Muhammad, but many significant pivotal people who have altered, and not even just altered, shaped Western civilization were indeed epileptics.
So this is not just you as a neuroscience student coming up with these conclusions.
No, it's actual academics who have PhDs, have studied this, epileptologists, they've done this their whole lives. And they'll say that Muhammad is an epileptic. Now let's get into it. Here we have a paper, it's called The Neural Substrates of Religion Considered. And as you can see, Muhammad is literally listed by those doctors in their paper as a potential candidate for epileptic seizures. And they give a diagnosis of differential diagnosis as complex partial seizures. And one of the important things is complex partial seizures are very, very commonly implicated with postictal psychosis. Now let's see what they describe as a description of his spells. Well, he was pale, he appeared intoxicated, he would fall, he had profuse sweating, yes, he had visual and auditory hallucinations, yes. That's the first paper. Notice also in this paper, there are many, many significant figures that these academics have highlighted to be potential epileptics. St. Paul is one, Joan of Arc is another, and then there's a bunch of others. We will go through a few of them. Like I said, due to relevancy and time, we won't be able to go through all of them. This is one paper highlighting Muhammad by name as an epileptic. Now we have another paper which tries to diagnose Muhammad's spells. And as you can see, the psychomotor seizures of temporal epilepsy would be the most tenable explanation. Although an unequivocal decision is not possible, psychomotor complex partial seizures, temporal epilepsy would be the most tenable diagnosis. The point to note here is, like what the author is saying, is like with we cannot know with absolute 100% certainty, like I said earlier, but looking at the data, it seems more and more and more likely that Muhammad was indeed epileptic. Let's go to another book. Now this one is from a book called A Tale of Two Dueling Neurosurgeons. I read this book as part of course material in university. Very fascinating book. One of the good things about this is it's not an academic book. It's more of like a history book, and it goes through the history of neuroscience, brain trauma, and how we got to the point where we are now. And in this book, he also, again, names Muhammad as a potential person suffering from epilepsy. And he also names a couple other people as well. And he says that epileptics aren't dysfunctional, and they did contribute significantly to the literary world. But one thing you note is, with these epileptics, you have the same chorus of voices returning to them. And this happens, like we'll see in a little bit, with Saint Brigitta and a couple other epileptic patients, and with Muhammad. It's the same group of voices, especially with Gabriel. It's the same voice, the most frequent voice over and over and over again. Now, one of the last highlights of this page is temporal epilepsy does not wipe someone's mental state clean. It simply molds and reshapes what's already there. Okay? Like I said, Muslims keep saying, how can a crazy person accomplish so much? And this is, again, all to go with their misconception and stigma surrounding the word crazy. Now we have another paper, but this one is of a genius in epilepsy. And again, Muhammad is listed by name as a person suffering from partial complex seizures. This is not me making this up. What is also staggering to note is that the authors list next to Muhammad many great, significant literary, artistic, and military geniuses as epileptics. This shows that Muhammad's achievements as being an epileptic are not only not either unique, they aren't supernatural at all. People with the same or similar disorder were able to achieve similar things. Now, before we go into it, we are about to jump into something what we call case studies or examples. So now we have a paper, Role of Psychotic Disorders in Religious History Considered. And this is not about Muhammad, but just generally about other prophets and significant religious figures. It's a long paper, but I'm just going to talk about a few of them.
So the reason for showing this is because to dispel the misconception, because there's a couple of pillars in people's mind where when they, the same idea kind of is applied to Jesus, lunatic, Lord, or liar. The same kind of idea with Muhammad, like, is he a lunatic? Is he a liar? Or is he actually a prophet? And with the lunatic, it's a straw man. Like, it's created to be this sort of over generalization of this crazy guy, like talks in like the Kahin of the past.
Yeah.
Like a kind of soothsayer type of crazy guy that doesn't wear clothes and is like saying this and that. He's not like that. And the reason what you're doing is you're smashing all of these counter arguments one by one. One of the biggest one is, well, how can a crazy person be so successful? Here's some examples, right?
Yeah. What's also interesting is, like, as a neuroscience student, I am aware that if you have brain trauma or a mental illness, that might make your brain's lobes communicate in a different way, or make regions of the brain communicate that normally don't communicate, resulting in what we call a synesthesia. You can end up becoming a genius. And synesthesia and mental disorders and mental illness is a common trait associated with genius, This is literally a whole separate topic on its own. But we will come across two specific case studies about this thing in this presentation just a little bit later on. Like Samir said, that this paper is showing that not only Muhammad is speculated to be just epileptic, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and most of these significant religious figures in history were actually most probably epileptics, just that they were misunderstood by people of their time. So this paper says analysis.
What do we expect, like, in a time of superstition when people thought the earth was flat and the sky was solid and there's such a thing as magic and evil? I mean, these people are not going to understand this. The Quran doesn't even mention the brain. None of the holy books do. They always talk about the heart.
The heart, yeah.
Right? Like,
I would say that the ancient Egyptians did know about brain surgery, but then again, they're not the Abrahamic faith.
Yeah.
But like I said, most of them never really thought that the brain was pivotal in this formidable way, and they had actually no idea how this could implicate prophethood, right? So the paper says analysis reveals that these individuals had experiences that resemble those now defined as psychotic symptoms, suggesting their experiences may have been manifestations of primary or mood disorders associated psychotic disorders, okay? In the conclusion, it's a very, for time and relevancy, I'm not going to go deep into these papers. You can, the references are there. Be my guest. You will be amazed at how much evidence for this theory is. So the conclusion reads, we suggest that some of civilization's most significant religious figures may have had psychotic symptoms that contributed inspiration for their revelation. It is hoped that this analysis would engender scholarly dialogue about the rational limits of human experience and to serve general public, personal and mental illness. The point is that people with mood, psychotic spectrum disorders have had a monumental influence on civilization. And what the author is saying, that people mostly misunderstand, and the general public mostly misunderstands this, and that's what they're trying to dispel. Like we were talking about, the whole negative stigma attached to mental illness. Now, this is very, very, very interesting. Now we're about to go point by point direct to Muhammad. Alfred Lord Tennyson, a 19th century poet who was known to have temporal epilepsy, known to have seizures, confirmed seizures. He ended up becoming one of the most genius poets in all of Britain, and to this day is amongst the best poets in Britain. He was anointed as the Poet Laureate of Great Britain during Ireland in much of Queen Victoria's reign. What is shocking is he also composed most of his poetry in his head due to a short sightedness problem. This is literally like Muhammad composing his poetry or the Quran in his head. And what's also staggering is Alfred Lord Tennyson would compose these poems and work on poems for years at a time, and all of this is in his head. And like I said, he's a genius poet. This literally takes the rug out of from the argument that Muhammad, because he's unlettered and he didn't write it, therefore the only possibility of him composing his poetry could be God. which again is shocking.
Speak to Alfred Lord Tennyson too.
Exactly, like, and what I'm trying to show here is Alfred Lord Tennyson is epileptic, but a genius poet, on a letter, not writing it like Muhammad and composing them orally. Now you tell me, does this not nullify Muhammad's uniqueness or Muhammad's miraculous nature of the Quran?
Isn't it true as well that with poets and writers tend to have a much higher rate of suicide?
Yes, that's like I said earlier, mental illness, poetry, intelligence are very related, and synesthesia is the term where all the writers and authors and poets, what happens is synesthesia, to give you an example, is you would look at the color red, but then you'd smell the smell of pepper, although there is no pepper or brown. This is happening because different parts of the brain have started overlapping or communicating that shouldn't be communicating. This has these negative, but it also has the positives where because of this overlap, authors and intelligent people can now utilize those neural connections to think in perspectives or ways other people cannot even imagine. So that's the whole, like, the acquired somewhat and the whole argument over there. Well, like I said, this is one very good example. Now, Samir, if you want, you can show them a picture so they get an idea of who this person was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you can see, like, this person was very famous for his poetry, and he was very influential and an epileptic. Let's go to the next case. Okay. Now we have a huge name, Edgar Allan Poe. Everybody knows him, an amazing storyteller, poet who suffered from epilepsy. He, like Muhammad, is told to have complex partial seizures, postictal states, and psychosis, which I was emphasizing on early. His poetry, some of his poems have great thematic resemblance to Muhammad's Quran. Like I said, we're not going to go into literary comparisons, as that's not the scope of this presentation. Now, what's staggering is, and what the author is telling you, Poe was able to use the creative genius from his illness to create memorable tales and poignant poems. This is very important. His illness is being used to show that that is what led to his creative brilliance. Like I said, how can a great poet, storyteller, writer, author, literary giant like Edgar Allan Poe be an epileptic? Who would have thought, right? So Samir can show you who he was. People might recognize him more by his picture at times.
Indeed. And there's even that one Nova, I think it was called Minds, interview with Dr. Ramachandran, where he was interviewing this young man, and this young man who was getting these epileptic seizures, and he felt like it gave him some sort of unique, I don't want to say superpowers, but it gave him some unique insights into the world. And he's like, I don't know if I want to stop these, even though they were harming him, because, you know, when he got epileptic seizure, it would mess him up. But he was getting such great insights, and he was feeling this profound, you know, connection with God, and he didn't want to lose it. And so obviously some of these people, they were actually using this to create some great literary works, right?
Oh yes, totally. And what's also interesting is because of the epilepsy, then postictal psychosis, you can have, because of the seizure, you can have during the psychosis a different completely outlook on life, and hallucinations, you can use them to create scenery or imagery in your writing, which a lot of these poets will do. And the one thing you mentioned was the feeling of happiness with epilepsy. You know, there are some seizures which are called ecstatic seizures, euphoric seizures, and a few of the authors that have those, where they would say that the feeling of euphoria and the oneness with the universe is such that you would give up everything to experience that again. So there is that side of the seizures as well. Moving on, let's go from Edgar Allan Poe to another literary giant, Gustave Flaubert, one of the most famous French novelists. And in the light of this, epilepsy ranks among the most probable diagnoses. And he says mesial temporal lobe structures. So we get temporal lobe epilepsy. Again, literary giant. Samir can show you the picture. Everybody should know about him. All right. Now let's go back to the presentation and the next case study. Here we have Fyodor Dostoevsky. Now, big literary giant, like insanely famous. Jordan Peterson recipes.
Popularized by Jordan Peterson recently.
Yeah, yeah. And like I said, he had epilepsy. Now with this one, he says partial epileptic syndrome from the dominant temporal lobe. Like I said, he also had epilepsy, but he somehow was able to achieve this literary excellence. Now, let's go to the next one. Here is an example from Kumagusu Minakata, who was a 20th century Japanese genius devoted to natural history and folklore. He suffered from temporal epilepsy. The point of showing this is that epilepsy is actually tied to genius and does not always result in degeneration of people and leave them completely dysfunctional. Like you can see this person, his post-mortem says that, yeah, he has temporal epilepsy, but still he was a genius. Let's go to another one. Is John Nash. He actually won the Nobel Prize in 1994 in economics. Genius mathematician. He had a movie made about him in 2001, The Beautiful Mind. Russell Crowe starred in it. One of the amazing things about this guy is he was full-blown schizophrenic, where he was hospitalized. He actually at a point thought that he was the apostle of God or chosen to deliver God's message and whatnot. And later on, his schizophrenia, apparently he says he'd stopped taking the meds and it kind of just went away it recessed. But the point to show here again is schizophrenia or epilepsy-like cannot always result in mental degeneration, but can actually give rise to genius. Okay.
Yeah, if you guys haven't seen that movie, that was a good movie.
It is a very beautiful movie. And it won a lot of awards too.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Are you saying Muhammad was a genius?
Yes. Well, here's the thing. I would not say he was a full-on genius. You can give him the idea that he might have been a poetic and literary genius in a very narrow way, where even if you analyze the Quran, you can say that the latter part of the Quran is poetically beautiful, but the earlier half of the Quran is longer surahs. The wording and the eloquence isn't as poignant as seen in the latter half. But even we can grant the Muslims, for the sake of argument, that the Quran is a literary masterpiece. What does that prove? Nothing. Muhammad could just be a genius like all of these people, right? So to say that, oh, Muhammad is...
It's beside the point. It's almost like either an appeal to popularity by saying he was successful.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean he spoke to God.
Exactly.
It's that's not enough to prove it.
And also, one of the things is, like, even in the Quran, you will see so many times, like, even the people around him had somewhat of an idea that something's up with this guy, because they kept calling him Kahani wa Majnun wa Shairi wa Majnun, that he's crazy and whatnot. And the Quran records that too. Also, what's interesting is, like, people back in the day, like what, thousands of years ago, they were living in an age of superstition and complete scientific illiteracy. So their gullibility was exponentially higher. But just to give you an idea, if you were to port Muhammad from the 7th century Arabia and put him in 21st century and then literally film him have his revelations, he would be in a mental institute.
Mm-hmm. I hesitate to say gullible, because that was just the best explanation they had available at the time, right? And humanity.
Well, one of the things is Greeks and Egyptians knew about epilepsy, and I think a few of them wrote about it hundreds of years before, and it was known in Muhammad's era as well. So what's interesting, like, the people like Al-Nadr bin al-Haris, they identified these things and they're quoted in the Quran, but the ones who would understand what was up with Muhammad were so few, and the general mass was so illiterate that he could still get away with most of it.
Yeah, he's a populist leader, right? With force and power. Not to mention that, like, sorry, I forgot my thought. Go ahead.
Okay, all right. So let's keep going to another person, Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte. Did he have seizures, psychogenic or epileptic? Well, the evidence says yes, he did.
Sorry, I remembered my point before you get into this. I was going to say that there was pockets of wisdom back then. Like people knew these things, like the Greek science was actually far more advanced, but Arabia was it was a backwater of the world. Makkah, it's like there was nothing there, right? There was the idols and stuff, but they didn't have that literacy. Whereas Aristotle, like much before, was writing about embryology. Muhammad's embryology in the Quran really, it does seem kind of sort of copied, right? By what was common knowledge back then. It's not new knowledge. Muhammad wasn't learning anything. He was just taking what he knew, right?
Yeah. Totally. So one of the questions Muslims raise a lot is like, how can a crazy person lead armies and create an empire and that spans like the whole continent, right? Well, here you have an example. Napoleon Bonaparte was also suffering from epilepsy and psychogenic attacks, but he was able to rule an empire, one of the most intelligent men, like you can see, we've known, especially in terms of military geniuses. This nullifies the objection that epileptics are dysfunctional and cannot lead armies or nations, or that intelligence is always negatively affected by such conditions. Okay? Now, we all know who Napoleon is. He doesn't need an introduction. Now we're going to get to a very interesting case that is very similar to Mohammed, Joan of Arc, involved in the 100 Years' War. She was a 13-year-old girl who ended up coming, let's just read the excerpt from the paper. Arc's exceptional achievements. How could an uneducated farmer's daughter raised in harsh isolation in a remote village in medieval France have found the strength and resolution to alter the course of history? Okay? And she says that she used to have these saints, these 6, 7 voices coming to her for 6 or 7 years, telling her to go fight the war. She ended up dying only at the age of 19, but she was anointed as a saint. Imagine, this random 13-year-old girl is hearing voices that God is telling her to go fight, joins the army, leads the army, changes the course of world history. It's very similar to Muhammad just coming from, as an orphan, under poverty-stricken, not very educated, and just taken over Arabia. It's not unique and exceptional in a sense now anymore. Now the next part is ecstatic epileptic auras, and that she joins the host of created religious thinkers suspected or known to have epilepsy. Now again, we have another instance of Muhammad being named alongside St. Paul and Dostoevsky to have changed Western civilization. Okay? And in the second side picture on the right side, it says bells have also been associated with the seizure of other non-epileptics. Muhammad, for example, he would hear the ringing bell sound before his revelations, and literally she would have the same thing. So it's quite interesting to see that she's having the same hallucination. What I wanted to bring is, not only was she able to influence and change world history, she was able to lead armies at a young, tender age, coming from such a, let's just say, underprivileged background. And Muhammad's story isn't really...
is even more amazing than Muhammad because she's a woman. She's a woman. She overcame all of the patriarchal norms and all of that, and that, which is even more insane, right?
Yeah.
Whereas Muhammad was coming from the tribe of Quraysh, and he was already in a sort of from a family of power, and
It's insane. When you start to actually look into this stuff, you're shocked at how much similarities exist. And the fact that these epileptics manifest same symptomology and same kind of behaviors for 14 centuries across is just phenomenal. We went over this one. All right, now here we come to a paper. Now this paper has a lot of case studies. I don't even know, 15, 16. We will go through just a few. And what I want to get to is postictal psychosis and how epilepsy can literally lead you to not only seeing angels, but believing in God, like Muhammad. And one of the case studies on the right side of the right picture is extremely similar to Muhammad. So here we'll just go through one of them. How did the patient believe that he was in heaven? He would appear to have depersonalization. He maintained that God had sent it to him as a means of conversion. He's a new man. whatnot. He saw God, epilepsy. Another patient said that a 14-year-old boy, after a seizure, saw the good God and the angels and heard a celestial fanfare of music. Quite interesting. Then we have more cases where, like I said, God had given him a mission to reform the world by law, which is the Messiah complex. I'm chosen by God, like Muhammad. Virgin Mary, who commanded him, so he saw angels in the Virgin Mary. And then there's this one where patterns, which included a vision of Christ coming down from the skies, almost like Muhammad saying, Christ will come down with his hands on the angels at the end of the time.
Isn't it interesting that each one of these found revelations in the cultural context? Either the Virgin Mary,
I know.
it was Allah, the God of Abraham, who, apparently there was Jews and Christians there, and he was traveling so much, he was a merchant. It's funny how they always managed to like, it's very rare to find someone that was like, aliens talk to me and they become successful. It's always something related to the cultural milieu, right?
Yeah. What's interesting is, like, if you were to read these snippets, you can find literally every single symptom traced back into Muhammad's life. Like, I'll give you one quick example. Like, one of this person had a state of ecstasy in which the victim sees the heaven opens, hears God speaking, right? There are direct hadith where Muhammad would come running and like tell the people, God opened, literally, no joking, we will see that later on. God opened a gate in heaven and was boasting about your ummah to those angels. Like stuff like exact identical ones, right?
Yeah.
Now, what's also is like that mystical delusional experiences were remarkably common in epileptics. Coming to the second screen, this is very, very important to understand this. When Muhammad would get his revelation, he would have smacking of the lips. Okay, we will get to all of these. I'm just going to point them out beforehand as well. Now, what I'm trying to say, sometimes that patient had a frightened feeling in the stomach before the attack. This is called epigastric rising. Muhammad had this when in Ibn Isak's Sirah, you read that when he was 5 or 6 years old, his belly was open and there were two men playing inside with it, and people thought he had an epileptic attack or a seizure or a stroke. This is a very common. He has that, she has that. Now watch what happens after. Okay? She would hear these voices giving her commanding revelations. A human life is like a tree or a shrub. It either grows straight up or bends and goes right over. As long as it is upright, it has the hand of God. These revelations in their nature are very similar to the command with the commanding voice. What was amazing, and this is very interesting, later the same day she heard a church bell ringing in her right ear, and the voice said, "My Father has made thee whole, go in peace." Muhammad said the most common type of him receiving the revelation is preceded by hearing of ringing bell sounds. Literally what happened to this lady. What's also important is she also admitted to hearing the Almighty's voice again on several occasions. She had a mildly grandiose attitude towards her visions, as in like, oh yeah, God is talking to me, oh yeah, it makes sense, and was garrulous and cheerful in disposition. So just reading this, you can see like how it's more likely that Muhammad literally had a similar experience to this person rather than actually an angel appearing to him and giving him the messages, because the nature of the verses and the voices she's hearing is very similar again. So let's move forward.
Someone's asking, is epilepsy good to have?
No, it's not a good thing to have. You can die from it. Like, I mean, think of this, your brain as a computer, as a motherboard, right? As a circuit. Would you like to short that circuit or introduce uncontrollable electrical surges shorting out the motherboard? Obviously not. So in a sense, epilepsy and epileptic seizures can cause severe brain damage. Just to give you a small thing is like, once you're what is electrical signals in terms of neurons, right? There's action potentials, which are incumbent on neurotransmitters and charges across cell membranes. If you keep firing the neurons and an electrical surge uncontrollably, you run out of a neurotransmitter called glutamate, which is an excitatory neurotransmitter. What you end up with is excitotoxicity, where because of overabundance of firing, what ends up is that the mitochondria has calcium ions sequestered in it, and it starts giving signals back to the cell to start initiating necroptosis. And they go into self-destruction. When they blow up, they spill their guts out, more glutamate, more constant firing, and become a cycle of bad. Very brief, and there's like other issues with like acidosis and whatnot. Like I said, that's a completely different thing. I don't want to go into too many details. All right. We are now at Saint Brigitta, a very famous saint, most likely suffered from epilepsy. Here the person says, are there any characteristics of Brigitta's revelation that fits the aura of temporal epilepsy? The answer is certainly yes, they do. Sensations felt during a revelation being carried away in a spiritual vision, like Muhammad was carrying the way in his heavenly journey. Now, what is important is when she had her first experience, Saint Brigitta wasn't herself sure that if it's the devil or if it's Muhammad, if it's God or not. That's exactly what happened to Muhammad. When he had his first experience, he was scared. He didn't think it was God or it was an angel. He thought it might have been the devil. And what happened was he ended up going to Varaka, Khadija's cousin, who had to affirm him. And then he started believing in himself as the prophet of God. Now, what's interesting here, this is exactly like Muhammad, where he had to go to Varaka bin Nawfal to go explain to him that, oh, no, it's actually the angel Gabriel. On the left side, if you notice, the description may be consistent with a partial complex seizure or postictal psychotic state, like I've been saying the whole time with Muhammad. It is interesting that Brigitta did not herself interpret her relations as primarily religious at all. Mataya, like Varaka, was an expert, did that. Very important point in the bottom right picture is Brigitta was 7 and 10 years old when she had her childhood revelations. It was not until her 40s that any visions in adult life are described. This time factor would fit in with temporal epilepsy, which is often described as having its debut in childhood and being dormant for several decades. Literally exactly what happened to Muhammad. Muhammad had his first few episodes, or the first episode his chest was open, when he was a kid under the age of 6, or around that age, living with his foster mom, Halima. And then he didn't have experiences till like he was around 40 years old. It's a very weird peculiarity to notice that Brigitta first has her experience. She firstly thinks she's being tricked and she's not sure if it's religious. She's then told by a friend that it is in fact religious. And then her progression and dormancy is similar to Muhammad as well. It's just weird coincidence after coincidence. Same paper going further. What I want you to understand is, like this paper said, temporal epilepsy is associated with visual, auditory, smell, and taste sensations. And one of the things with Muhammad was he's expressed his constant love for perfume in many hadith. This could be one of the reasons why. Secondly, she had a lot of fits. And one of the things where you would notice is the aura of bright light. Now, in many hadith, before Muhammad started hearing his visions, he would have these visions or these dreams with auras of bright light, like the gleam of dawn. We will go through that. Muhammad also, like we told about the epigastric rising, where his tummy was cut, people played with his belly, and then switted back up. Muhammad would also see people or hear people in graveyards talking, right? One of the most fascinating feature I found in her revelations was the descriptions of hell. Now, I'm going to read the part. Characteristic of Brigitta's revelations are powerful images which are very concrete and full of detail. Some of the descriptions are long with a stream of detailed illustrations. Her description of purgatory and hell are shocking and macabre. Demons vomit venom of virulent colors compared to Muhammad and Allah feeding people pus. Hideous bodies pass by, the whole weird bodies and heads of zakum trees and jinns. Demons have tridents and claws with which they plunge into the heart, stomach, and feet of victims, which is iron rods and hell. And then there's this thing where
this is interesting. You're quoting what sounds exactly like Quran.
Exactly, it's what I'm trying to exactly. I'm quoting the Quran an analogy next to it.
Do.
There's this hadith where in Miraj, Muhammad, there was this guy whose head was being destroyed with a rock constantly because he did something. And it's kind of similar when they plunge into the horror stomach and feet, they scream like lunatics. And this is a like weird. Then the one devil ravaged the couple. So for zina, you will be punished. The demons catch souls, stab them, and then crush them between their teeth.
We should do a social experiment where we post this and we ask people, is this Quran? Or is this Hadith? Or is this Saint Brigitta?
Right? And the point is, like, there's these similarities in even their thought processes and their descriptions as well. It's remarkable.
I just want to highlight this point because this is such an amazing point. Saint Brigitta did not get her revelations until she was in her 40s. Okay, and if we look at the Sira, I just want to add a little bit of explanation here. A lot of the Sira is a construction. I'm currently reading Sean Anthony's book, Empire of Faith, and he says there's obvious inspiration that has been taken from the Bible in constructing Muhammad's life in Ibn Ishaq. For example, the whole thing about the monk that followed him and there was a cloud over his head, and like the Muhammad of the Sira is a construction that is meant to portray a certain image that they wanted Muhammad to be. So when you're saying Muhammad was a shepherd, well, actually, no, he was a merchant, not a shepherd. The shepherd is only found in the Sira. There's no evidence that he was actually a shepherd other than in the Sira and the Hadith, which comes far later. But what we have from non-Muslim accounts is that this man was known as a merchant who traveled all over the place. So you have this construction. Now you have, as part of the construction, Muslims are highlighting, early Muslim scholars are highlighting that Muhammad was this normal man up to his 40s. And then suddenly he's saying, well, would I lie? Do you guys know me as being truthful? Well, same with Saint Brigitta. She's even a saint, for God's sake. She's being honored as this honorable woman, and the Catholics, they pray to her and whatnot. I mean, and then you are finding like such intricate points that, if someone doesn't know the Sira and is not studying neuroscience, no one would find these things. These are like incredible points that you're highlighting.
What's important is we haven't even started to get into the juicy bits, dude. Like what we're just in the primer part of the presentation. What we're about to get into next, when we actually get into Muhammad's, it will be straight up embarrassing. Like, let's get to that actually now.
This whole hell thing is blowing me away. It's just like, it's the same thing.
It's the same thing, yeah.
It's crazy, yeah.
So one of the things with Muhammad was, and like a lot of people will say, is like childhood trauma and stress can lead to epilepsy. And epilepsy is normally idiopathic, but stress has been implicated. And childhood seizures can develop into temporal epilepsy in adult life, which we talked about with Alfred Lord Tennyson earlier. Now with Muhammad, his childhood was quite troubled. He lost his dad before he was born. As soon as he's born, he's given away. Then he has this episode with his heart being cut open and whatnot. Then he returns. His mom dies away. Then he's given to one uncle who dies. Then given to another uncle who dies. Then he's 25. Apparently people are supposed to marry young. He can't find a suitable marriage person. Ends up marrying a 40-year-old widow. And we don't know much about his life before the advent of his prophethood, right? So, but there are glimmers and instances where you can tell that, okay, something was not all okay there. So let's start with this guy's childhood and youth and what we know about his early years. So around the age of 6, Muhammad experienced a vivid hallucination. Like I said, it could be 5, it could be 4 years of age. And they cut open his chest, they took a cloth, washed it in water, sewed it back up. His foster mother, Halima, thought that Muhammad had a stroke or is possessed by a demon. She tried to return him to his actual mother. Now, what's staggering is this hallucination reoccurred with almost the exact details the night of the heavenly journey. A common occurrence in epileptics where seizures are preceded by a rising sensation in the abdomen sermon. But we told you epigastric rising, which we referenced for about 2 case studies prior. Okay, so let's see. Qureshi brother of mine have thrown him down, opened up his belly, and are stirring it up. When people who are having the epigastric rising and they have a seizure, sometimes they might have a hallucination tied to it, and a lot of times the brain confabulates stuff to explain why you were experiencing something. Anyways, we ran towards him and found him standing with a livid face. So obviously, like, he didn't actually have a surgery. He's standing with a weird face. He said, 2 men in white raiment came and threw me down, opened up my belly, certain for what I know not. So we took him back to our tent. Now, what's important is, and this is what's very important, Muhammad was not seen by anybody having these 2 people throw him down and have the surgery, because he was playing with kids, and nor are we supposed to take testimony of those his playmates as any serious, because we have adults that are telling us that they actually were there. They feel it might be stroke or something else, and they should take this back to the family. He might be possessed or whatnot. And then she asked me what happened, and Halima told Muhammad's mom. She answered that she feared a demon had possessed Muhammad. Now, what I'm trying to say is, back in the day, epilepsy or these schizo or these kind of delusions were just attributed to demons and genies, because people, like you said, were not as informed as they are these days. The similar story is repeated in the Hadith in Sahih Muslim, where he tore open his breast, took out the heart from it, extracted the blood clot out of it, restored it. I don't believe the needles mark were there or they can signify anything, because, like you said, these hadiths were 200 years down. You can see, like, the earliest one has the belly, the next one has his chest and his heart coming out. There's an evolution of text, and they try to justify it, right? So the part that he could see the marks of the needle could be a later addition. But here we see epigastric rising. People dressed in white. People dressed in white is a common hallucination as well. Now, this on its own could be just speculate that he's working and he's stressed out and whatnot and anxious or just exhausted and he passed out. But keeping in mind the holistic view of all of his symptoms, it is not out of the possibility that, in fact, when he did fall down in a state of unconsciousness and his eyes were turned towards the sky like this, and then he suddenly comes up, my lower garment wakes up panicking about it, this could, in fact, be somewhat of a psychogenic attack or an epileptic fit. Like I said, the Greeks knew epilepsy as a falling sickness. One of the fascinating things, and this is where it gets embarrassing, this is now we're getting into the part where Muhammad, I'm sorry, Muslim, not trying to offend you, he will look a little crazy to you. This is where the real juicy part begins. Sorry, you were saying something, Abdullah?
I was just gonna say that when it comes to the hadith and the seerah, when we are quoting examples that are not, let's say, not in a favorable light, not putting Muhammad in a favorable light, we can probably assume that some of these might be true, because there's no incentive to fake that. Like, why would someone want to lie? Why would a Muslim hadith historian want to make Muhammad look bad? They probably didn't know that these are signs of epilepsy, so otherwise
exactly
I've included them. But
they were trying to be nice and vigilant. We got to record how Muhammad received his revelation.
Yeah,
unknowingly, despite their sincerity, they just recorded classical epilepsy symptoms.
And not just that, but, like, for example, Bud Ehrman said this is one of the historical methods where, I forget what it's called now, but when you're studying the Bible or you're studying the statements of Jesus, the ones that are not being used to prove the dogma, we can probably assume they're true, whereas the ones which are clearly, Jesus raised from the dead, okay, skeptical about those, because those are the ones that, they were trying to prove a point with, right? So just keep that in mind. We're not necessarily saying that these hadith have to be true, but if they're true, or if you believe they're true from that basis, you should be able to accept all of this. If you don't accept any hadith, then I don't know why you're even a Muslim. But anyways, the Quran itself doesn't have, it has very little context. So hadith, without the sira, it's very difficult to interpret the Quran. So it's not really preserved then, right? It's
Yeah.
kind of an obscure book that has some random things about when people felt sleepy and Allah helped them, and like, who felt sleepy and why did they? What battle was that? And like, it's kind of meaningless to your life then, right?
Yeah. All right, let's keep going. Like you said, with these kind of with hadith, right? Like for us as atheists, we're not bound by the Sunni Orthodox view that you either have to accept all of Bukhari or Muslim or no. It's not like all in or all out. We can apply a secular lens to the hadith and discern based on that. Because we're also adjusting for variables of bias, because these books were written by Muslims who were also victorious, and they wouldn't want to project Muhammad unless they're the worst of lights, right? So a lot of times where they might write down this incident about his chest being open, just to make it a little bit more believable, because it's just so bizarre, they might add the phrase, "Oh, we saw the needles," Anyways, let's get back to the rocks and trees can talk. So before Muhammad became a prophet, he admits that he would be walking around in the valleys in Mecca, and I recognized the stone in Mecca which used to pay salutations before my advent as a prophet, and I recognize that even now. So he had a stone that was talking to him before his revelations.
Sounds perfectly normal to me.
Yeah, I mean, people talk to stones all the time, right? Like, point is, what's interesting is temporal lobes are very exclusively tied into object recognition. Damage in temporal lobes can literally hinder your ability to distinguish between a banana and a human, or the ability of an inanimate object and a human face. Like the ears or like fruits from vegetables, or a plate from a box. You lose that perception, and then sexuality is tied in there as well. We will talk about that at the end. The point is that, yes, it makes sense that he was seeing inanimate objects or hearing inanimate objects talk to himself because of his condition. And it's actually very in line with postictal psychotic states. Now here's the second one. And when he was returning back home, every tree and rock he passed greeted him. And so he went back to his family in good spirits, convinced that he had seen something stupendous. When he went to see Khadija, I saw Gabriel again, and rejoice, he will get everything but good. So basically, he's literally talking to trees and rocks, and the trees and rocks are greeting him. It's just embarrassing and bizarre. Let's keep going. Just general thing is to show like the delusional psychotic state can induce these delusional beliefs in people, where Muhammad says that he heard a tree tell him that there's a genie. So this is just so weird. Genies are supernatural. So this invisible genie at night is hiding or whatever, and this inanimate tree tells Muhammad that there's supernatural fire created genies hiding behind me. Make whatever you want to make of that. This hadith was weird. Like Muhammad started hearing a tree stump crying, hugs the tree stump. There's different versions, very frequently related, and then people say that, oh, we heard it too. I highly doubt it. But the whole idea that a prophet of God gets off this pulpit to hug a tree trunk that he crying out like a pregnant she camel, and then he put his hand on it, became quiet. One of the things also we see is Muhammad and his buddies believe that cows and wolves can talk. And the prophets, I believe,
Muslims believe in miracles and the unseen world and whatever. How do you know all of these are not just like supernatural occurrences that occurred just to Muhammad and that's it?
Well, like I said, like the pathology, the prognosis, and the report, the abundance of reports from other epileptics, and the evidence of neuroscience and the brain imaging, people reported these kinds of hallucinations, or the nature of the hallucinations are very consistent and in line with what you'd expect from somebody with the psychosis or epilepsy. So here's what ends up boiling it down to, right? Like you have historical evidence, you have case study, you have evidence from neuroscience, literally empirical evidence. You can trace back certain hallucinations to certain lobes and certain parts of the brain. You want to throw all of that out and accept that, oh no, it's actually just an angel talking to him, and actually, this all happened. Occam's razor, what makes more sense, right?
Did he give the tree stump a name, Donald Stump?
That's a good one. I didn't think of that.
What I wanted to say, I mean, this is a common atheist argument, is, well, all these miracles happened, and the sea was split, and God did all this and did all that, and raised people from the dead, and put the birds back to life, and healed the lepers, and then nothing, and now nothing.
He stops. Like, why did God do all of his best work 14 centuries ago? Did he take early retirement? And isn't it not unfair to show his best miracle signs to people living in the pre-scientific age of ignorance, and then not show any signs to the people who can verify and record those miracles?
Exactly.
Right? There's a lot more objections one can do to it. I mean, God, for some weird reason, almost always uses his omnipotence to manifest himself in the most bizarrest, obscure, and cryptic ways. I don't get why. Let's go to the next slide. Now we're getting into the first revelation, okay? This is one of the first instances where there's a lot of detail, there's a lot of evidence. Where we'll see. So what you'll see is isolation. What we'll start with. Isolation can actually induce psychosis in people. Samir has mentioned this in one of his videos on Neuroscience of Prophethood as well. We'll go through a paper. We will then see that when Muhammad has his hallucination with the angel, choking and difficulty breathing, then he has visual and auditory disturbances. Then he has twitching of muscles on his neck, myoclonic seizure, the whole perception of fear and terror, which we saw with other epileptics before, is a common onset. Initial fear of going mad or being possessed, like he tried to jump off the mountains. He was spaced out, absent seizures, and he was suicidal, which also is very in line with postictal psychotic states. So, transcendental meditation and endoidal meditation are associated with enhanced complex partial epileptic-like signs. The same signs or the diagnosis that many academics give to Muhammad is complex partial seizures. What was Muhammad doing? He would go into isolation for days before he'd come out. So what we see here, and I'm going to read the relevant parts out to you. So remember the bright light auras? The first form which started revelation was the true vision in his sleep, and he did not see any vision, but it came like the bright gleam of dawn. Okay, that's the visual auras. Now, what interesting is, after that, solitude became dear to him, and he used to seclude himself in the cave of Hira, where he would engage into hadith for a number of days before returning to his family and gathering provision again for this purpose. So he was constantly isolating, meditating in a cave. Okay. And he'd be gone for a while. He would then return to Khadija. So one day, now, there's two versions. One version said that Muhammad was actually passed out, and he saw the angel come to him. The other said that he was awake, and the angel came to him. But what you see is the angel came to him and asked him to read something, and he said, I can't read it, and he was pressed really hard, and 3 times where he can't breathe. Now, well, a lot of times if you're having a seizure, what can happen is the stiffness of the diaphragm can cause your ability to not be able to breathe, or hyperventilation as well can occur. So you might even feel like difficulty breathing. Now, in an interictal psychosis, Muhammad could be explaining this, that a angel is hugging and squeezing him this hard. But also one might ask, why would God cause the first revelatory event to be of such pain and agony for the messenger of God?
You know what? Like, you just made a very interesting point. I just want to kind of dwell on that. When certain things happen in our life, sometimes our brain tries to comprehend it by making up an explanation.
Yeah.
Example of this that comes to mind is sleep paralysis. When your brain is, yeah, exactly. Just triggered that idea in my mind. Like when you're sleeping and you're kind of half awake, half asleep, but your body, when you sleep, it paralyzes your muscle so you don't fall off the bed. You don't punch a guy and end up punching yourself in your sleep.
Yeah.
The body has evolved this mechanism of paralyzing you, which also, in your dreams, I don't know if you remember this, but like if you're trying to walk, you can't walk fast. It's very slow. Have you ever experienced that in your dreams?
Yeah.
You can't like move or something. And then with sleep paralysis, when you wake up, a lot of people see little demons sitting on their chest. And they're like,
there's a reason for it. So what's happening is with sleep paralysis, your sleep cycles are like mid to lower brainstem areas of tegment and tectum, and they're all involuntary, right? And then they're communicating with higher cortical structures, which are responsible for wakefulness and voluntary action, right? So what ends up happening is the brainstem is miscommunicating with the higher structures, where the brainstem thinks that you're still asleep, right? But your body, it keeps your muscles and your breathing shallow and stuff paralyzed, because that's the same part that controls it. But your higher cortical structures are awake, and you might be dreaming, but that dream might then start being projected out into your vision, because your brain is not communicating effectively. It is confused if it's awake or asleep.
Wow.
This is very well understood, and this is a very good example you brought up to show that how people back in the day would misunderstand and misattribute things they didn't know to supernatural genies, like the jinn al-kabus, they say.
Even today, right? I mean, never mind.
Yeah, even today people do that, but it's nothing supernatural whatsoever.
Yeah.
So let's keep going. Then he asks him to recite in the name of your Lord with a commanding statement. Now, what's important here is, remember that lady who had the voice from God and angels to go preach to people peace and humans are nice and whatnot? Very similar in nature. Now, what's important saying, he let him go after he recited. Then the prophet returned with his heart trembling with fear and went to Khadija, wrap me up, wrap me up. Remember what I said, the intense fear and paranoia and anxiety? That's postictal. Yes, it is very common. That's what's happening. Then he was in a blanket wrapped up, and then he tells like what happened to him. And he tells her that he goes to his uncle, like Matthias were saying Brigitta, and then he says, oh yeah, no, it's the same angel, you're fine. You're actually the prophet of God. And this is the same reason, like Saint Brigitta didn't believe her hallucination at first as well, and she needed Matthias to convince her. In the right side, Ibn Kathir Volume 1, you see a different version, and it's even weird. At this point, Gabriel took hold of him and choked him hard. Now, this isn't even squeezing hard. He's being like choked hard, which is difficulty breathing. Then released him and said, read. And then he brings this weird carpet and stones, and it's just bizarre. So what's also interesting in the second half is, then he left. The messenger of God was overcome by anxiety, and he asked himself, what can I do? He's scared, like he's not sure what's going on. Then he was afraid still, rose up, but then Gabriel appeared before him again. Sight filled with him wonder, and we will get into this in the next few slides, what he actually saw.
Before you move on, again, this is like an epic point. We have to emphasize this. Mohammed, in the 7th century, went into a dark cave for a long period of time, experienced something he couldn't understand, couldn't breathe, was choking, maybe saw things. He was like, what the hell just happened to me? Sorry, he didn't say that, but what in God's name, what in Allah's name just happened to me? He ran home, confused, spoke to his wife, and his wife said, hey, maybe God's talking to you. And he's like, oh, that makes sense. The angel talking me. This, I cannot underscore what an amazing point you just made.
And even an amazing point. Hold this thought, okay?
Okay.
Hold this thought. I will bring you back to something we saw earlier. The You look at the picture for Alfred Lord Tennyson that I showed you. The Victorian poet and dramatist Alfred Lord Tennyson also transformed suspected epileptic seizures into art, but only after having been reassured that a seizure disorder was not what he had. Do you understand what happened?
Wow. Again, it was explained to him, you mean?
Yeah, so Alfred Lord Tennyson was scared and stuff, and he was told, no, you don't have to epilepsy. And it's only then on that he's like, okay, I'll keep rhyming and making my poems. Saint Brigitta, same thing happened. Mohammad, same thing happened. It's so remarkable, these coincidences that keep popping up with these people. Okay, where were we? I think we were, we were here. Now, let's get to Ibn Ishaq and how he recalls the incident about the first revelation. In this one, you see, so I read it and he departed from me, and I awoke from my sleep. So Ibn Ishaq is saying that Muhammad was asleep or passed out during this whole angel hallucination. So it could have been a vision in his head. And these words were written on my heart. Now, he himself says that he hated and he could never imagine himself as an ecstatic poet or a man possessed. Ecstatic poetry literacy, we talked about that earlier as well. So what he did, he was so ashamed, he went down and he wanted to kill himself from a mountain. And this is recorded in Sahih Bukhari as well. And as soon as he got to the mountain, he heard a voice saying, Muhammad, thou art the apostle of God, and I'm Gabriel. And then he raises his head to see who he was. And Gabriel, lo and behold, is in front of him in a form of a man with feet astride the horizon, sitting on a chair. What is important here, you will notice, is epileptics temporal epileptics have a common hallucination of seeing human apparitions constantly. And you see this all across the board. Human apparitions. They will describe them. Oh, he was an angel in the form of a man. And this will happen with Muhammad a few times. Not only did this happen here, when Muhammad was attacking Banu Qurayza, Gabriel showed up in the form of a man, Dahiya Kalbi, apparently. So we'll go. Now, what is interesting here is I stood gazing at him, moving neither forward nor backward, and then I turned my face away from him, but to wherever region of the sky I looked, I saw him as before. Very important point. Firstly, Muhammad is lost staring at him, and he's having an absence seizure. We will get to that in a second. In the second page of Ibn Kathir, you can see he stood there staring at this thing for a while, complete absence seizure. Now, what is very important is he says, wherever I look in the sky, I saw him as before. Think about this. If this pen exists externally to my brain, the pen has photons that come to my eye, get interpreted in my brain, and hence I see it. If I turn my head that way, the photons aren't coming to my eye, I can't see the pen. But what if the pen was being generated by your occipital and temporal lobes due to epilepsy or psychotic states in your head? If it's generated by your head, wherever you look, the image will follow because it's not outside, it's inside. So it follows your gaze. Very important point, and this will come up again and again with Muhammad, where he'll see a jinn later on with the same problem.
Wow. Amazing point. Wow.
And I continued standing there, neither advancing nor turning back, sent her messenger searching me, and they gained the high ground of Bammak and returned to her while I was standing in the same place. I don't know, these people searched the whole city, he's still standing there. This is a classic absence seizure. Then he parted from me, apart from returning to my family. God would not treat thee. Okay, so basically, literally, the thought process of Khadija and how they're reasoning through, just to see, Muhammad's having epileptic signs. He thinks something's up with him, and like a good wife, Khadija says, "Oh, you can't be epileptic. You're a nice person." What kind of reasoning is this? Nice people can't have diseases to them or neurological disturbances. There's no logical flow in this reason.
Well, they weren't saying that. She was saying you're not possessed, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
right? Like
they didn't know what neurological disorders was.
Yeah. Well,
you're not possessed. God, Shaitan or Satan wouldn't. God wouldn't dishonor you with Satan like that or whatever.
Yeah. Now, in the second, in Ibn Kathir's version, I raised up my head to the sky. He's sitting like a man with his feet placed evenly across. Oh, Muhammad, you're the messenger I'm giving. These commanding voices are very common auditory disturbances. And he said I stood there, kept looking at him, like he was there for a while, absent seizure. Now let's go to another one. Again, we see in this narration where the bright auras in his dreams, very similar. And then he used to go in the cave alone. And then the angel came to him, caught him forcefully, choked him, pressed him hard, released him. The point we're getting to here is solitude, like we said, is notice that is to induce psychosis. Now, what's also important is notice how his neck muscles were twitching. And that's myoclonic seizures that we discussed earlier, like fasciculation or muscle twitching. So listen to this. Then Allah's messenger returned with the inspiration, his neck muscles twitching with terror till he entered upon Khadija and said, "Cover me." Interesting. I mean, anxiety can cause muscle fasciculations, but that seems more on myoclonic. So he was covered till his fear sensation, like with the psychosis, is common as well. Then, as we see that he goes to Waraka died. He tried to throw himself off of mountains, but every time he'd try to go, the voice, schizophrenic voice, the auditory voice, Gabriel's voice will come and save him. Yeah, at this point, it's pretty clear that the guy had an experience in a cave that he was unsure of, and it really troubled him, scared him to the point where he's almost losing his mind trying to jump off mountains, and these voices are coming to him to save him from doing that. Again, another narration about Gabriel sitting on the horizon in the shape of a man again and causing Muhammad to be scared. So somebody called me aloud. I looked in front of me, behind me, on my right side, left, I didn't see any. I called again, I looked about, saw nothing. I was called again and then raised my hand and I saw there on the throne Gabriel sitting. Again, Muhammad starts trembling out of fear. I'm not saying this is the trembling from the seizure, or it could be that he was trembling and this was happening in his head as a confabulation. But again, fear is a very common denominator here. Same thing mentioned again. Let's go to the next narration. Now this is very interesting. There's a verse in the Quran, لَقَدْ رَأَى مِنْ آيَاتِ رَبِّهِ الْكُبْرَى, something like that in Surah Najm, verse 18. And the Prophet saw a green screen covering the horizon. This is regarded as one of the greatest signs that Muhammad was shown to on his heavenly journey. And later in this explanation, in this presentation, Yasir Qadhi will explain it in detail. And trust me, you will have a good laugh about it. Just to give you a spoiler a little bit, it's a big tree in the seventh heaven, which has colors coming out of it that are weird and bizarre, and gold butterflies. I'll leave it at that, and then we'll have Yasir Qadhi explain it to us later on. This is where it's smack that case closed. He was an epileptic. Condition during revelations. Let's get to this. This is the most important, juiciest, and relevant part of the presentation, and where all of the symptomology is. Okay, the aura of ringing bells. How does the Wahi inspiration come to you? He said, it comes to me like the ringing of a bell, and is most severe for me when it is over I attain, or at times the angel in the form of a human being, and I retain whatever he speaks. We have discussed in papers before that ringing bell sounds are precursors to seizures is extremely common. In fact, we had a literal case example with the exact same thing. Let's go to the next lip smacking and jittery teeth. When Muhammad would get the inspiration, he would bear it with great trouble, and he used to move his lips quickly with the inspiration. It would be something like this, which is lip smacking or rhythmic, and it's an automatism, right? But what's happening here is Muslims are saying, oh no, it's just because he's following the angel fast, which is like Samir said, is a confabulation and a post hoc rationalization. Now, on the one on the right side, you see when the revelation came to the Messenger of Allah, one could hear what sounded like the drone of bees before his face. And to me, this sounds like his teeth were jittering. If you do this fast enough in a seizure, it'll sound like a very... That's probably what it is, but it's bizarre on its own. This is hilarious. Now, Muhammad would sometimes snort like a camel when he would get the revelation from Allah. It's embarrassing. So this guy comes in and he wants to see, and I'll quote, "Would it please you to see the Messenger of Allah receiving the revelations?" Omar lifted a corner off the cloth, and I looked at him, and he was emitting a sound of snorting. The narrator said, "I thought it was the sound of a camel." When he was relieved of this, he said, and then he gives his ideas in Revelation. This is just straight up embarrassing. This is a straight up seizure. The guy's on the ground, and he's snorting like a camel.
So, like, sounds to me that like Omar was running a sort of freak show, like like, hey, look behind the curtain at the prophet receiving revelation, and he's like sweating like a camel. Like, what a strange hadith.
Yeah, what a strange hadith. Now what you're looking at, this is just ridiculous. In this book called The True Guidance Part 4, these are certain hadith that you have to really dig, and you can't find them on the sunnah.com because they're in Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal's Musnad and whatnot. Those aren't uploaded. But here, the authoritative hadith tradition relate that Muhammad used to faint whenever revelations came to him, which did happen a lot. We will go to specific examples later. It is claimed that he used to act like a drunkard, which is also well known. So when he would get the revelation, he'd start acting like he's drunk and confused, which disorganized behavior and speech, very common. One guy claims that he's taken out of this world. Now, remember Saint Brigitta, her body floating out of this world and stuff? Another similarity. Abu Hurairah says that when Muhammad received revelation, he was overwhelmed by trembling. Now, what I feel is the trembling that was happening when he saw Gabriel, which he ascribes to fear, is probably not the same. But the idea that he was overwhelmed by shaking, this is just a tonic-clonic seizure. Another account says that he became distressed. This is hilarious. Foaming at the mouth and closing his eyes. At this point, it should be clear that if you were sitting in the 21st century and you knew modern neuroscience and you have this guy who's, let's say, time travels from 7th century Arabia, and he's having these disturbances in front of him, and he's telling you he's talking to God and whatnot, would you take anything that he says seriously? Of course not. Like, this is a joke, an embarrassment at this point.
And honestly, how many millions of people took this seriously only because they were not given a choice? I mean, the Islamic Empire spread using a lot of not so, like basically coercion, right? There's a lot of coercion, right? And even at Muhammad's time, even the great companions, Amr ibn al-As, Khalid bin Walid, and I forgot what the third one was, they all realized the tide was turning. Militarily speaking, Muhammad was winning, and they all switched sides and they joined him, right? And so there was still some battles going on, but the fact is that even if you didn't believe him, and apparently according to Yasir Qadhi, to the very end, Abu Sufyan was skeptical up to the conquest of Makkah. He still was skeptical. This man really a prophet? But eventually everybody had to join him, because either you joined him or you died.
Well, like the fact that most people left Islam right after he died is quite in its own evidence that people really didn't believe him, and it was mostly political alliance.
Yeah.
The fact that Muhammad, in his earliest parts of his career as a messenger in his 30 years at Mecca, was extremely unsuccessful, yet those parts of the Quran appear to be the most eloquent and beautiful relatively. So you can kind of see that it wasn't really the Quran or his poetry that was convincing people. Islam really began to grow when he became politically significant.
Yep,
right?
that's a good point. It's a good
Yeah.
point.
Now, Ibn Kathir has this whole chapter in his Sirah Nabawiyya, how the revelation used to come to the Prophet. Honestly, it's literally a chapter. You can rename it to symptoms or a case study of epilepsy. No joke. It's literally 99% of those are just epilepsy symptoms. So we're going to go through this left screenshot. And we've already gone over the ringing bell. What we're looking for is agonizing pain and sweating on a cold day. So Aisha says, I saw him when revelation came to him on the extremely cold day. Then I left him and his forehead was bathed in perspiration. Okay. And then if you go down in the Hadith, by God, the messenger did not get up, nor did any member of the family leave until revelation came down to him. He underwent the agony that used to seize him with sweat emerging like pearls from him, even though it's a winter's day, because the heavy burden of revelation that came down upon him. So just to give you an idea that this guy is suffering immense pain from the seizure, and it's sad at this point where you start feeling sad for these people because of how they were tricked into or lured into believing in all of this nonsense. Why couldn't God have made the descent of his revelation a joyful experience? Because we do have ecstatic epileptic seizures as well. The fact that he chose the epilepsy that seems to be causing pain it doesn't really make sense. And the whole point, now just one thing to remember, all of the symptoms and all of these anomalies you will go through, the Muslim position, the explanation to counter all this evidence in neuroscience is it was the burden of revelation. No joke, that's it. And to me, that is one of the most ignorant explanations about this phenomenon I could find. Like, it's just not true. All right, so...
Sorry, I want to make a point before you move on, which was very interesting. Pulekeshin in the comments made a very good point, which is it's quite likely that early on these were authentic experiences, but later on, like, the less poetic, beautiful verses, like halal to you, this and this and this and this, and when this person dies, you give this much, to your mother and this much to your father, whatever. All of those are probably revelations of convenience. And to me, the most damning one of all is the marriage to Zainab.
We will get to that at the end.
Okay, yeah.
What's interesting is the question arises: was Muhammad just psychotic and deluded, but yet sincere in his belief, or was he actually eventually aware of his own fallibility and his fakeness, but kept the ploy going? Right? Because in the initial parts of his life in Mecca, he gets sad, and then the revelation pauses, and then he's trying to commit suicide. But then later on in Medina, he's just summoning verses at will whenever he wants them, right? So again, there's a thing like, is it him actually being psychotic and sincere in his delusion, or is he actually knows that he's a liar but just keeps the ploy going and he's a con man? That's something up to speculation, right? So
Indeed, it is a speculation, but there's a lot of red flags where he actually benefited. Greatly from revelations. The Zainab thing, sleeping with the captives of war,
the Aisha dream, marriage.
Aisha's dream, even adjusting the verses based on what the companion is saying. For example, the women are complaining, the women, even back then, the Muslim women complained, how come all of the verses about men? Like, and Allah's like, I'll throw you a bone. Oh, you guys are equal too. A man, the believing women, the righteous man, the fasting woman, whatever the verse was like. And at that point, it's like it's coming on demand, like you said, right? Like revelation on demand, the abrogation thing, like a lot of the verses about jihad, like these. There's just too many red flags here. He's just benefiting from this, right? And I know right at the end, if you guys wait until the very end, Gondal has a very interesting clip about a modern prophet who benefited from his revelations as well, which is
identical to Muhammad.
Yeah, so wait for it. We're gonna get.
Let's go to the next one. So we have heavy breathing, hyperventilation, flushing of color from face, and agonizing pain. In the top left, we see that Ubaydah ibn Samir reported that when revelation descended upon Muhammad, he felt a burden on that account that the color of his face underwent a change. I think it's called facial flushing or something like that. Again, very common. Now, Al-Tirmidhi related this, that we only know, okay. Yeah, so the messenger of God would become in pain when the revelation came to him, and his face would look very serious. According to one account, this wording should be, and his eyes would close, and we recognize that in him. I didn't mention this earlier, one of the slides earlier, there was and you can read up on this too, was a lot of the times when some people have seizures, they close their eyes and they're unable to open them. And that's one thing. But these are like absent seizures. Okay. Let's go back for one moment.
I'm just wondering out loud, like, you know, I'm still kind of laughing at that previous example of Omar lifting the curtain to show the wedding prophet. But like, I wonder how much, I wonder how many of the people around him knew this was actually some sort of crazy thing and were taking advantage.
The Quran does record up to 30 and 28 instances with varying degrees where they're calling him a liar, forger, soothsayer, crazy poet, and whatnot.
But I'm talking about not these guys. I'm talking about his companions knowing.
Yeah.
Omar, Abu Bakr.
But they did not notice the weirdness, right?
Were they just taking advantage of his, you know, his situation? And
yeah, because they ended up they did become the killer.
Did well, eh? If I may.
So, okay, this one's okay. So this one is a very interesting one, and it's a variation of the one prior, where he was snorting like a camel. In this hadith in Bukhari, that was in Muslim, says that the Prophet waited for a while, and divine inspiration descended upon him. And in that one, he said he summoned it on, but this one he had to wait. Yalla came and pushed his head underneath the screen which was covering the Prophet, and behold, the Prophet's face was red, and he kept on breathing heavily for a while, and then he was relieved. Again, you can see it's another seizure. You can even say the heavy breathing could be translated or could be taken by the other narrator as snorting like a camel. But now what we have is in Ibn Kathir, Volume 1. Here we said, would you, like again, the same, would you like to look at the messenger of Allah, the revelations coming to him? He raised the edge of his robe from his face, and it was all flush, and he would moan like a newborn calf. So the camel moaning has switched a little bit to the calf moaning.
Can you do a demonstration for this?
I don't know how. I mean, it's something like that. Like, imagine this guy's just laying on the ground, snorting like weird sounds like a camel or a calf, and he wakes up and said, oh yeah, God just gave me this message.
But not snorting like a pig though. That's how.
Yeah. Oh yeah, make sure. Or the donkey, the braying of the ass. And what we see is like the snorting there. Then we see here's something interesting. She then went to the messenger, questioned him while he was sitting, having suffered, holding his mug in his hand. God sent down when the mug was in his hand. He raised his head and said, you women have been given permission. So this is like you said earlier, like we were talking about. Was this even an instance of revelation, or like he was just holding eating this thing and the women like, can we go? He's like, yeah, God told me just go up.
What is this example? Is this when he was about to die? Are you talking about?
No. He was when Omar, concerning the hijab, his wife Sauda going out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you women have been given permission to go out and attend your need. And you can say like this isn't even a revelation. He's just sitting there with the cup in his hand and he's like, yeah, go ahead, right? And that's what I'm saying. Like a lot of this postictal psychosis, the revelation does not always correspond to the seizure event. It can be due to the psychosis state that ensues after seizures that could last months. And they say this is, now what also important is this shows the revelation did not fully absent his feelings from. Like I said, there are different types of seizures. In tonic-clonic, you lost consciousness. Whereas absent seizure and some other seizures, you do not lose consciousness. Well, this shows that he had complex partial seizures. Now, another one, is when Messenger of God, he would get the revelation, he would become pale, he would ignore those with him, and none of them would address him. Ignore those with him. This could be, again, absent seizures, where he's lost focus and he's zoned out. Now, what's important is the intensity of the pain described. And never once did I receive the revelation without thinking that my soul was being seized by it, to the point where Muhammad saw it every time it felt like he's going to die. Another thing, again, reported is when the revelation came to him, he could still see his eyes remained open, while his hearing and heart were made empty, and that he would get a headache and would cover his head with a henna plant. Self-explanatory again. We've gone through this one before, but this is an interesting one where severe sweating before revelation occurs again, but this time it's with Aisha. So the stress that Aisha was accused of cheating on Muhammad and whatnot. Read the words. This is hilarious. By Allah, I never thought that Allah would reveal divine inspiration in my case. I consider myself too inferior and unworthy. I hoped Muhammad might have a dream which Allah might prove my innocence. By Allah, Allah's apostle now got up and nobody had left the house before the divine inspiration came to the Allah's apostle. So there overtook him the same state which used to overtake him when he used to have on being finally devoured. He was sweating so much that the drops of sweat were dropping like pearls, though it was a crazy cold wintry day. When the state was over, he was smiling, and the first word he said, Aisha, thank Allah, for Allah has declared your innocence.
This one is very convenient because he was in a lot of trouble because Aisha came. He's an old man and Aisha is a young lady, and she comes in back into the town with this, handsome young man who is bringing her in. And, people start talking and they're like, oh my God, this is bad. So now Muhammad is a problem. Mm-hmm. What does he do with Aisha, right? And this actually solves the problem. Allah saved her, right?
Yeah.
The thing is that she just don't accept this, right? I don't know how they don't believe she was innocent, which is weird. But anyways, that's in the time.
Now this is an interesting one. It's from Tabri Volume 8, and this is about Zainab's marriage to Muhammad.
So what are all of these examples showing? Is it to show that these are convenient revelations now? What are you proving?
Well, it's showing that if not only just convenient, but like this one is showing, like, what I could speculate is if he's actually psychotic or having a postictal psychotic phase, what you can see here is he might be completely sincere and actually might be having these things. It's just that the stress or the things that are triggering those seizures are unknown, because epilepsy is mostly idiopathic.
What does that mean?
What is showing here is that before this episode, or before he can say that, oh, he's talking to God or getting a revelation, he's fainting, he's having ringing bell sounds, he's jittery teeth, snorting. So it shows that the fallibility of the experience itself and the subjectivity of it. But then on top, that the convenience attached to it too. Why this specific example of Zainab? I can't say that he was just doing it for pure benefit, because like we said at the end of the case study we show, the identical symptoms is he could have actually thought, like if he's psychotic, he actually thought that God wanted him to suddenly marry his adopted son's wife.
Oh yeah.
Or you could also speculate that he really liked her and he used God to marry her to himself. Mm-hmm. I would side with the former explanation, keeping in mind the video we see at the end.
So what you're saying is, if I can kind of reword this a bit, if Muhammad was narcissistic enough combined with the psychosis or had delusions of grandeur, people like this tend to feel like the world is for them and is handed on a silver platter, and they cannot distinguish between the inner voice and their own external world, to the point where they feel like, if he really truly believed God was speaking to him, God becomes him. And when God tells him to do something, he may not even necessarily realize that he's actually making it up per se. Is that kind of like, am I saying?
Yes. He's so delusional or lost in his own delusions that he actually believes that God is telling him this. Yeah.
It's all instinct. It's all just raw emotion.
Yeah.
It's not like, he's not like rationally, psychopathically making a plan, but it's just like whatever he needs. It's like God is doing it for him.
One of the other things was the authors of the same Brigitta paper brought this up, that you could see that how a new idea will arise and the previous one would be abandoned, or the evolution of ideas in light of epilepsy. You could trace the thought process. Anyway, so in this one, this is with Zainab. While the messenger of God was talking with Aisha, a fainting overcame him. When he was released from it, he smiled and said, "Who will go to Zainab to tell her the good news, saying that God has married her to me?" And then he recited the verse, and Aisha wasn't happy. But the point is that he faints.
Aisha wasn't happy.
The point is she was so jealous. Listen to this. She still remembers that Zainab gave Salama some anklets that she was wearing. Like the detail, the gossiping detail, man. Like she's jealous she had those anklets. Okay, so now we're going into the section called general hallucinations. And these are just general, weird, absurd occurrences that Muhammad had that we had seen to have occurred earlier in our case studies in light of postictal psychosis. The first slide you're going to see in this one is going to be Yasir Qadhi explain to us in the most wonderful way the greatest miraculous sign Allah had ever shown Muhammad in Surah Najm, verse 18. Please listen to this carefully. This is quite interesting. It's 1 minute 30 seconds long. The original lecture is in the link. It's a 2-hour lecture, part 2 of the Miraj Sira series. And it's from the 15-minute mark to the 20-minute mark, and I've condensed it. Have a listen. See what you guys think.
Meaning it's changing. And Allah Azza wa Jalla himself says in the Quran, إِذْ يَغْشَى السِّدْرَةَ مَا يَغْشَى. That's when the tree was covered up by what it was covered up with. Allah doesn't tell us what. It's a circular thing. إِذْ يَغْشَى السِّدْرَةَ مَا يَغْشَى. When the tree was covered up by whatever was covering it up. And so the Prophet is saying, فَغَشِيَهَا أَلْوَانٌ. There were colors basically going up and down the tree. لَا أَدْرِي مَا هِي. I don't know what those colors are. It's a beautiful phrase here. And the Prophet said, إِذْ يَغْشَى السِّدْرَةَ مَا يَغْشَى. That when the tree was enveloped by what it was enveloped by, the Prophet said, فَرَاشٌ مِّن ذَهَبٍ. Butterflies from made out of gold. So one of the things that is surrounding the tree are beautiful butterflies with exotic colors made out of gold. So this is of the things that is surrounding the tree, and there are other things as well that we don't know, because Allah has said, إِذْ يَغْشَى السِّدْرَةَ مَا يَغْشَى, that when the tree was enveloped by what it was enveloped by, مَا زَاغَ الْبَصَرُ وَمَا طَغَى. The eyes of the Prophet did not move beyond that, nor did they go astray, meaning he absorbed this beautiful sight. Right? Then Allah says, لَقَدْ رَأَى مِنْ آيَاتِ رَبِّهِ الْكُبْرَى. Looking at this tree, Allah said, he has seen of the ayat al-kubra. And if Allah is saying this is a major ayah, then what is bigger than this, right? So by viewing the Sidrat al-Muntaha, Allah is saying he has seen of his most magnificent creations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the Sidrat al-Muntaha. And in one version of a property, the Prophet ﷺ said, when it was enveloped by what it was enveloped by, the Prophet ﷺ said, it kept on changing until nobody can describe it for you. So the tree is not a static tree. We can, whatever image we get, it's an ever-changing tree. Colors are going up and down. There's butterflies of gold. Its leaves are massive. Its fruits are as large as the jars of Hajjal. So we get some impression that it is a dynamic tree. It's a beautiful, majestic tree. It is an otherworldly tree. And this is the Sidratul Muntaha.
Oh boy, that was quite a listen, eh? Interesting to see that the greatest sign of Allah given to Muhammad or shown to Muhammad on his heavenly night journey was a tree in the 6th or the 7th heaven. And that tree has these dynamic colors coming from it, there's butterflies of gold around it. And the first time when I heard this, I was just laughing because I know so many people personally that have had or tried shrooms or psilocybin, and I've had literally the exact hallucination where they actually saw butterflies and the colors fluttering from the leaves of the trees. And this is what we talked about earlier, the green screen covering the horizon. You can add that into there too. This just shows, and like I said, I am touching the tip of the iceberg here, where I'm not going into the detail and breaking down the whole story of the heavenly night journey and how it could be explained in light of modern neuroscience. That journey is on its own, like a whole book But just to give you an idea that the culmination of Allah's greatest sign was that. Let's go to the next. So, Samir, are you still there?
Yep, I'm still here. Yep.
Okay. So before we go forward, what I wanted to talk to you about here is the memory, right? So epileptics have been said to be affected for their memory. And this did happen with Muhammad, but it was attributed to black magic. So magic will work on Allah's messenger so that he used to think that he had sexual relationships with his wives, while he actually had not. And Sufyan said this is the hardest type of magic. And then he goes on this bizarre black magic story about creaming and comb stuck in her hair and going to the well and blowing on knots and whatnot. It's delusional on its own. But the problem is what I'm trying to say is like, epilepsy can affect your memory, but it does not mean that you become a completely demented person. And not only that it affects your memory permanently, you can only have episodes or lapses for, let's say, a couple of weeks, like you said, the drunken state, where you become disorganized or delusional for a little bit, but then the state goes away and you're fine afterwards. The link down there will tell you that. So not only that, but Muhammad would also forget Quranic verses as indicated on the right. And in fact, the Quran attests that Allah would make him forget a lot of the verses. And that the concept of abrogation could be a post hoc rationalization to come back and justify the forgetting of verses by Muhammad. One of the other things is when we do look in my presentation on is the Quran perfectly preserved, in the Hadith literature, lots and lots and lots of verses that used to be part of the Quran have gone missing, don't exist, or were cancelled out or lost. And this is recorded extensively in Suyuti's Ibkan, Kitab al-Masahib, and whatnot, but that's another detailed side point. But just to bring it up. Now, with that being said, let's go to some other interesting hallucinations. So remember the first time his chest got open and his heart got washed as a child? Exact same hallucination is recurring almost with the exact details, but this time before the Miraj, right? And what is also interesting is notice the auditory disturbance before this whole thing begins. So Muhammad is sleeping, between sleeping and awake, and he hears a voice, the one in the middle of the tree, sorry. And then his heart is cut open and whatnot. So the Prophet came out to us and said that some nations were displayed before me. A prophet would pass in front of me with one man, and it goes that he saw 70,000 people, this projection in the heavens. Do you remember that person in the first few slides in the case study where I showed that the guy said ecstatically coming that God had opened a gate in heaven and he could see these people and he was talking to them? Notice though in this, again, how wherever he looks, no matter where he looks, he sees the projections. And again, like I explained earlier, if the image was external to his brain and not a hallucination, if he would look away from it, the image would not move with him. But because the image is being projected by his brain, is inside his head, no matter which direction he looks, the image will still remain in his field of view.
Kind of like via headset, like when you move your head,
yeah,
still it stays there, right?
Yeah. So this is, like I said, again, similar to him moving his head and seeing the angel everywhere. So this again is, like I said, also, if he's seeing these 70,000 people in the sky and for a while, nobody else saw him next to him. So obviously it was just him hallucinating, not everybody else seeing it. Here's an interesting one. Like, I don't even know, like Muhammad is hanging out with Gabriel, who hears a voice, and another angel arrives, and Muhammad receives his revelation during the episode. So like I said, we mentioned earlier the idea of a gate being open in the heaven for the case study. Again, this is a gate open in heaven today, which had never been opened before. Then an angel descended through it, and then he came down to earth, and 2 lights were given to you, and he gave them this bizarre. This one is interesting. Muhammad runs back ecstatically and reports his most recent auditory visual disturbance of hearing Allah boast about him and his followers to the angels through a gate open in heaven. Hold this thought, and I believe we had a slide earlier. I just want to show it just for convenience. That was this one, I believe. And if you see here, Sedman mentions states of ecstasy in which the victim sees the heaven open, hears God speaking. Literally, what is happening in this projection of Muhammad seeing the nations across. So let's keep going. We saw the angels and the gate. Okay. Muhammad hallucinates seeing one of his friends flying with the angels in paradise. Like I said, with delusional psychotic people, these kinds of absurdities, when put in light of neuroscience, started making sense why these people would experience these kind of weird.
You also tend to see people who died who you loved. You tend to kind of visualize them.
Exactly. Yeah. So this one is just weird. An animal was brought to the Messenger of Allah while he was going with the funeral. He refused to write on it. When the funeral was away, the animal was brought to him and he wrote on it. He was asked about it. He said, the angels were on their feet. I was not to ride while they were walking. When they went away, I wrote. This is what I say is like these bizarre confabulations and explanations are common in like psychotic states, and like you can see like psychotic things here. I don't even know what to make of. Like he could have just ridden the donkey. Why does the angels walking have anything to do? Right? Like it doesn't make any sense. There's no cohesion. Yeah. Like I said, like the tangential, circumstantial speech and just organized thought could also be playing a part here. In this one, Muhammad is leading a prayer and he heard something, and then Muhammad was happy with the guy and says he saw 12 angels rushing to see which of them would take it up. So he's seeing 12 angels running around the mosque. Nobody else sees them. Okay, let's see what's the next one. This is very important. Now, we know this story that one day Muhammad was expecting Gabriel, but Gabriel never showed up. Muhammad's imaginary friend is normally very punctual, apparently, and this was uncharacteristic of him. So Gabriel later complained that a dog inside Muhammad's house had prevented him from entering. Angels do not enter a house with a dog or an image inside of it. This is just an outright bizarre incident, and this is where the Islamic cynophobia originates from, i.e. the phobia of dogs. And to me, this is a delusional belief. It makes no sense. Why would angels care if their dogs inside a house or not? Well, if that extension, you can ask that, well, there's dogs on planet Earth. Angels should not come to planet Earth at all.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you can see this the disorganized thought process leading to this stuff and these delusions. One of the things before I end is like illness and sickness, and if you have a fever, you are more susceptible, and fevers can cause hallucinations. This is a known thing. So when Muhammad is fallen ill, suddenly Gabriel comes to him, and then he's praying for him and safeguarding him, and blah 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 blah. It's just bizarre. Angels have to come pray for this guy. So this one is about Banu Qurayza. Now, after Muhammad has stopped fighting and put down his thing and he went to take a bath, Gabriel suddenly shows up with his head covered with dust and comes to him saying, you have put down your arms. I haven't. And then Gabriel says, go attack the Banu Qurayza. And then Muhammad follows. Now, just the idea that you're having an angel be the source of your military action, which led to the beheading of up to 400 to 800 men and boys, it's just very bizarre. And the delusional psychotic idea of having an angel apparition tell you to do it is just weird, which we talked about earlier as well. Like psychotic and violence can ensue in postictal psychosis as well. The Sira version of this, though, says that it was angel appearing in the shape of a man, like the shape of Yasir Qadhi. Okay, so this one is interesting, where Muhammad is just chilling, and Gabriel comes down and he leads Muhammad in prayer, and then Omar's like, "You sure what you're saying is okay?" And the guy's like, "Yeah, I'm sure." And then, so basically, imagine seeing Muhammad praying with an invisible, imaginary imam, and then he prayed with him like 5 times. Invisible imam, okay. Didn't know that was even allowed, like having angel imams. So.
Yeah.
Allah and Gabriel praise Muhammad's wife, Khadija, and assure her a place in heaven as she brings forth a delicious bowl of soup. I mean, so one of the things was like the earlier was like grandiose delusion of self grandeur, and people that you're related to are somehow also elevated to this elevated positions, right? Gabriel comes to Muhammad and said, "O Messenger of Allah, this is Khadija coming to you with a dish having meat soup. When she reaches you, greet her on behalf of her Lord." So Allah is saying salam from the heavens to Khadija and relaying that message through an angel to Muhammad, and that she'll get a place in heaven. It's just bizarre. This one was just outright like, what the hell is this even supposed to mean? Where this time, Muhammad is sitting, offering prayer night, and then Satan appears in front of him. Muhammad has a fight with him, puts him in a chokehold, and then for a ridiculous reason that the Prophet Solomon only had power over demons, lets the demon go before anybody could see him the next day. I actually think the demon never existed, and Muhammad just had a fit on his own and confabulated this weird story.
Okay, yeah, that's a good example. Just to go back, confabulation is when you kind of make up an explanation to explain something that you don't understand. So a lot of these examples, actually, what you're saying makes a lot of sense, that if you don't know what's going on to yourself, you have no idea, you may actually make up an explanation. I had a friend, a coworker, who told me that he has mental illness in his family, and he told me that he would hear things, he would hear voices. And he told me this happened once in university. They were telling him something, and usually it's something mean. And then it happened again. And then the third time it happened, he was in the car with his dad. And then that's when he realized, okay, this is not real. There's nobody in the car with me except my dad, yet I'm still hearing voices. Whereas on university, on the campus, and then he got help, he got drugs, and he got antipsychotic medications, and he was fine after that. Now, put yourself in Muhammad's situation. He's experiencing these weird things. His wife is telling him God is talking to you. They believe in devils, and so he's making up explanations that fit according to his understanding, because there's no other explanation. What else would it be? It has to be devils.
Yeah. What's also so with this one, if you remember, I pointed out earlier, but it's in Brigitta, that the idea of seeing or hearing dead people have been dead, is a common delusion. And here we have a narration where it says that Muhammad hallucinates hearing the voices of two dead people being tortured from inside their graves, and then he asks for a green leaf of date palm tree, breaks it into two pieces and puts one on each grave, and says that their torture will be lessened because of these green leaves. Absolutely illogical, incoherent nonsense, like you would expect from somebody who's psychotic. This one is very interesting, where Muhammad saw Gabriel with 600 wings, and this is mentioned in the Quran, but I don't understand, like, what is this supposed to signify? Did he have time to count those 600 wings, or is 600 wings a euphemism in the Arabic language for an overabundance of wings? It's just bizarre, like, This one's interesting again. Like last time, what we talked about was like he was shown a projection in the sky, but this time Muhammad is shown projections from heaven and hell. Like basically, imagine yourself a live 4K feed with a 4K projector beamed on a mosque wall. Muhammad had that happen to him in 7th century Arabia, and he literally said that he's seeing the display of paradise and hell as he's praying. Okay. One of now is just like, this guy was just straight up weird. Like a deputation of the jinn came to the Prophet and said, "Forbid your community to clean themselves with the bone or dung or charcoal, for in them Allah has provided sustenance." So you have a genie come up to Muhammad, and then the genie tells you that they eat all the food of the leftovers and charcoal and dung of human food, so don't eat them and leave it for us. And that's the explanation Muhammad gives, that to eating, using bone, dung, or charcoal to clean yourself after you've answered the call of nature. like I said, incoherent, weird, absurd nonsense, delusional. This one's interesting. Now, this is in Imam Malik's model, where the Muhammad was taken on the night journey. So this is part of the night journey, and he saw an evil jinn seeking him with a torch of fire. Whenever the messenger of Allah bless him and grant him peace turned, he saw him. Again, notice wherever he looks, the genie is there, because again, the genie is inside his head and not actually out there. And this on its own is part of the grander hallucination of him and his journey to heaven. Okay. And then he goes on and on and on. This one is interesting. Just imagine that this guy not only is seeing genies, he's hanging out with genies, he's talking to genies, and then he's reciting poems and Quran and poetry to genies. And then the genies are accepting Islam and whatnot. Now, one thing and one explanation for this, and if you were to read the revelatory circumstances surrounding Surah Jinn, they're fascinating. What happened was Muhammad goes to Taif, people of Taif reject him, and he's pelted with stone. Muhammad's sitting outside the city, feeling of rejection, feeling of insecurity, low self-esteem and self-confidence. Nobody's believing in him. The genies believe in him, and that's where this whole thing comes in. And if you read, the genies came and then he recited the Quran to them, and they had a better reaction and whatnot. So the whole circumstances surrounding the Surah Jinn was quite bizarre. This one was quite interesting as well, where this happens before the Battle of Badr, where Muhammad sees the opposing army and is scared because his army is comparatively much smaller. So then you can see he panics, okay? And Muhammad panics and he started to pray. His cloak fell off. Abu Bakr picked it up and put it back on him and grasped him from the back and said, "Prophet of God, I value more than my father and mother. This is enough of calling upon your Lord. He will assuredly fulfill what he's promised you." So even Abu Bakr recognized that Muhammad's reaction of excessively panicking and suddenly praying is very inappropriate. And what's also interesting is in Ibn Ishaq's version of it, Muhammad fell a light sleep in the shelter for a while. Then he woke and said that he can see Gabriel holding a horse with dust covering his teeth. Again, this guy's panicking, he's tense and he's stressed. He goes in his tent, passes out, has an episode, gets up, has a hallucination, everything's all good. And this time, Muslims obviously were, let's say, emerged victorious of the battle, but the next one, the same thing. Even though they were more equally matched, they lost the battle. But this time, the angels, they didn't help because Muslims weren't listening. The first time they did. Like I said, confabulating supernatural explanations to explain naturalistic phenomena is a common output of psychotic and delusional individuals. We have now reached the final section of our presentation, and this deals with the Quran. Now, we talked about how literary genius and poets and literary genius like Edgar Allan Poe or a couple other big names were epileptics, but they still composed amazing poetry and literary work. Could Muhammad's poetry or poetic rhyming be a result of his epilepsy? Let's find out. Now, here we have a patient who is an epileptic, and the report describes a patient who started compulsively rhyming after a seizure disorder with absolutely no real interest in poetry or whatsoever. So a 50-year-old Brighton man complained of being driven to write poetry. For 5 years, he experienced words as continuously rhyming in his head, and he felt the need to write them down, show them to others. This is very important. He did not talk in rhyme, write excessively in non-rhyme, or read poetry. The point is that he's not talking, rhyming all the time to normal people in normal conversation. Why this is important is because Muslims say that the way Muhammad spoke versus the Quran, the speeches are distinct, so they can't be the same.
Yeah.
But that shows that that's not the case, because this person can't separate those two, his compulsive rhyming and his thing.
And Mohammad Gilan, the Muslim neuroscience student, says, I know people in my lab who have doing well in their lives, but they're able to write these big like books, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, totally. Now, what's also interesting was it's a behavioral change, but what he says is he began having complex partial seizure with at least 2 secondary generalized tonic-clonic episodes. And listen to this again. His seizures manifested as a sensation rising in his stomach, followed by a brief alteration of consciousness. Epigastric rising again. They gave him some meds, and they repeated the evaluation. Now, this is very important. On examination, he was circumstantial and somewhat vicious. What he's trying to say, circumstantial speech, is you kind of start talking about something, but you go beat around the bush and you keep jumping and you eventually come to the point, which is a common thing in the Quran, and he just keeps jumping topics. This is just a trait of Quranic language. What he also says is viscosity. Now, what viscosity happens is what it's referring to is people who are epileptics or have hyperreligiosity as a result of their epilepsy, they become obsessed with a subset or a certain group of topics, and they constantly keep talking about them and keep repeating themselves over and over and over again, like the Quran. You have even in the same surah, at times you will have like 3 verses later, the same concept is repeated, or like Surah Rahman, the concept repeated again and again and again. This is viscosity. So can it be possible that Muhammad, with no history of epilepsy in the past, ended up having epilepsy, no history of poetry in the past, ended up having epilepsy, would predispose him to rhyming? Now, also, when people might say that, oh, but he was rhyming in his head, how could he compose the Quran in his head, like we talked about? Alfred Lord Tennyson did the same thing with short-sightedness due to epilepsy. He composed everything in his head, and he ended up becoming the poet laureate of Britain and amongst the most famous poets. Let's go to the next slide, and this will tell us about viscosity and social cohesion. So, a viscous and circumstantial speech is referenced here again. Obsessive focus and repetition on a small scale of topics, loss of jumping and wandering in thought is a prominent feature of the Quran. Yes, this is shown again in the paper that it is quite common with temporal epilepsy. Right? Like I said, I don't want to go into details which side, which lobes and whatnot, but just to show that yes, viscosity in the circumstantial speech, like the Quran exhibit, are common features. Here we have another patient who was epileptic, but she was given epilepsy medication, which altered her neurotransmitter level or whatnot. Point being that your brain, if affected, and your chemical levels, if changed due to epilepsy and whatnot, can affect the language center of your brain, Wernicke's and Broca's areas, which can lend itself to you starting to rhyme and become a very good and successful poet, and we see that Allan Poe and other poets. Now, one of the interesting things is this paper says, in contrast, our patients' versifying took the form of discrete, highly structured, creative outputs, and the Quran is like that. Now, what I want to bring, this is the concluding part, is what I want to bring to you is like, let's just say for the sake of argument, I do agree that there are certain parts of the Quran that are very eloquent and beautiful, yes. But then there are certain parts of the Quran that are abysmal and very terribly worded and incoherent and just display disorganized speech. There are glimmers of literary excellence in the Quran, yes, but there are lapses as well. The theological backdrop of the Quran prevents Muslims from seeing those because they can't expect anything apart from Quranic perfection. Now, keeping in mind, I honestly feel the caliber of Muhammad's Quran and its content and its, let's say, literary expression and style is not even near to the content of some other epileptic poets and stuff that we've seen. Now, one could then say that if other poets could compose better things in other languages and whatnot and be epileptics or enjoy the same level of success, this is completely nullifies the point that Muhammad's Quran could have only originated from God. Now, it makes sense that the Quran could be a result of his epilepsy, postictal psychosis, where his symptoms, as I said earlier, are very clear. So, do I think Muhammad had temporal lobe epilepsy? I feel the symptoms and the evidence and the breadth of the evidence is too much that it can't be ignored. At the same time, the explanatory power of the alternative that Muslims want us to believe, that all of this being a result of burden of revelation, does not make sense and is not consistent logically.
Yeah.
At the same time, now that you look at it, so on one hand, I have neuroscientists, doctors, and the whole body of evidence from neuroscience telling me that now, like, this guy most probably was an epileptic, like many other people, significant historical figures. Muhammad was probably just like one of them. That's what I feel.
So I have a question from the audience, just to kind of pick up the flow a bit, give you a break. So someone's asking, how is it that the non-Muslims also saw the angels? So apparently Allah sent angels to the Battle of Badr, and because of the angels, the Muslims won. But at the Battle of Uhud, I don't know why, either they didn't see the angels, or maybe the angels were bored and didn't want to help, or maybe Allah wanted to teach the Muslims a lesson. I don't know. Like, I'm sure you can come with lots of reasons to explain, right? Before you explain your thing, I'm just gonna like quickly show something, which is the miracle of the sun. So there's actually a known instance where in 1917 there was literally thousands of people who claim to have all seen the same hallucination of, I believe, the sun stopped in the sky or something like that, and they saw the Virgin Fatima, or Lady Fatima, or something like that. So there is a phenomenon known as mass hallucination.
Wow. Yeah.
I don't know if that's what happened. Like, I'm more likely to just believe the whole story of angels, people seeing angels, is made up. That makes more sense than, but it could be a mass hallucination. What do you think?
There are, like I said, mass hallucinations could occur where, like, if you're so invested into a cult or a belief system, that belief system might predispose you or make you think in certain ways.
Yeah.
Like, you will be more susceptible to look for patterns in relation to your ideology, or, you know. So I would say mass hallucination can happen, yes. I have seen videos where these church healers are standing in the crowd and they go like this and the whole crowd falls off, right?
Yeah.
So that's possible, definitely. And the other thing, like you said, that it just being manufactured, because you have to keep in mind that these hadith were written 150 to 200 years after. So even though these questionable things seep through it, a lot of it has been manufactured to back project and whatnot and save face.
Yeah.
So like I said, I don't really think that anybody saw the angel. The point is that we can make many arguments, and this is, if Muhammad saw the angel in the shape of a man, most of the time the angel would appear to him that way, and most of the time nobody would ever see it, right? But then, like, 2 instances, some random guy comes in, Muhammad says that's an angel, and everybody believes him.
Yeah, exactly. And someone else is asking, and then we'll just get back to the presentation, just finish it. Last question. Can anyone die of epilepsy? Muhammad Mustafa is asking, and how did the Prophet survive it so long?
Yeah. Like I said, so what I want to explain, why could epilepsy happen? So epilepsy is just an electrical surge in specific or all over the brain. Now, epilepsy could be because of stress, because of depression due to serotonin and dopamine levels. It could be drugs related. It could be a tumor in your brain. It could be a lesion. It could be so many different things. It could be a fever. So a seizure can have so many onsets, idiopathic, right? And the seizure can last for a while. So like I said, a lot of epileptics can survive depending on the intensity of their disorder. So, for example, if you have, let's say, a tumor, you're less likely to survive because the tumor grows and life expectancy isn't as good. But let's say if you're epileptic because, let's say, you had a perinatal lack of oxygen or traumatic brain injury when you were a kid or trauma, right? Then your epilepsy might come out in different ways, but it might not affect you as badly the one resulting from a tumor, right? And you might be able to live and manage with it. So also seizures, if they keep going for a prolonged time, just because your brain has so limited energy, constantly firing, just exhausted, the cells just burst, like I said, with excitotoxicity, and you can just die.
Okay.
So there's just that. Yeah.
So yeah, let's get back to the presentation then.
Well, so most of the presentation is done. The last part is, again, I'll bring back to this one guy, Wayne Bent. So what happens is in Muhammad's life, Muhammad has a son called Zayd bin Haris, right?
Adopted.
And he goes to his wife one day, and Zayd isn't there. His wife is in questionable attire. Muhammad sees her, develops a liking to her, rushes back home mumbling something. And then this verse is revealed. And Muhammad, remember when you said to the one whom Allah bestowed favor, and you bestowed favor as in Zayd, keep your wife and fear Allah. So Zayd asked Muhammad, do you want me to divorce my wife so you can have her? And Muhammad said no. But then Allah says, Muhammad, while you conceals within yourself that what is Allah to disclose and you fear the people. So Muhammad was hiding something about Zainab in his heart that he wouldn't want to disclose because of social backlash. And then Allah revealed it anyways. So when Zayd had no longer any need for her, we married her to you in order that there not be upon the believers any discomfort marrying their adopted sons' wives. So what happened is Muhammad abolished adoption to marry his adopted son's wife by using Allah. Now, what we will do is we will play this video from Wayne Bent and look at what happens and tell me if this is not an epileptic experiencing the same delusional psychotic episode 14 centuries later. And this is such a great example. So before we play this video, I would like to conclude the presentation here. And the presentation would end after the video ends. This is a 3-minute video. At the end, I would say you can even argue that Muhammad could have been a literary genius, but he could have been just an epileptic. You can also argue, you can say that the idea of Muslims saying that, oh, he's crazy, he couldn't have authored a literary masterpiece like the Quran, proven to be false by virtue of showing examples from history that other people have achieved similar feats. How can Muhammad lead armies and create a civilization? Again, shown Joan of Arc, Napoleon Bonaparte, and other historical figures. How can Muhammad, let's say, let's say, how can Muhammad preserve his intellect or create this whole cult religion for 23 years? Again, intelligence isn't negatively affected. In fact, sometimes epilepsy can lead you to genius, and like I said, schizophrenia, the guy that was John Nash, who won the Nobel Prize in economics, and then the guy, a Japanese guy that we talked about earlier, was a genius despite his epilepsy.
Yeah.
So that being said, in light of all of modern neuroscience, it is more likely, and it is absolutely possible and plausible that Muhammad suffered from a neurological disturbance. What we can say for sure is that there was an underlying neurological condition. We can narrow it down to, let's say, schizophrenia form, postictal psychosis, or temporal epilepsy. We can't for sure specifically say, oh yeah, this guy had a tumor in this left temporal lobe and that's what caused it. So at this time, the Muslim position is reduced to my prophet experienced all the symptoms of epilepsy, delusional psychotic behavior patterns and symptoms. I am now supposed to discard all the evidence of neuroscience and accept the explanation from 7th century Arabia that this was all due to the burden of revelation.
Yeah.
It's a ridiculous proposition to even think of. It's absurd.
Let's see the video.
Before that, I just want to point out a few things that I couldn't discuss, citing relevance and lack of time, because I wanted to keep it as short as possible. Now, with epilepsy, with the temporal sexual behaviors implicated, I did not discuss hypersexuality in relation to Muhammad. This explains, like with epileptics, they can have episodes of hypersexuality and hyposexuality. So, for example, Muhammad having married Aisha because he saw a dream could be a direct result of his psychotic and his weird sexual tendencies. But then Muhammad also marrying 13 wives and then going to them in one night could be his hypersexual phase resulting from epilepsy. There are other behavioral changes where sometimes Muhammad would see an image and his face would turn around, he'd rip the image down and have a weirdly angry reaction.
He didn't like curtains with faces in the house.
Yes. Then there's obviously to his.
It was angels' fault, right?
Yeah. Then the details about his personality and his obsession with like odd numbers and his ritualistic repetitions, and then repetitions of these duas, and the OCD that can come with it, you know. We didn't talk about the details of specific events like the heavenly journey and whatnot. But at the end of the day, this concludes the presentation. And what we'll do is we will play this video, and as soon as this video ends, the stream will end. Until next time, I hope you guys had a great session with me where you learned a lot of new things, and hopefully this gave you a completely new perspective to look at the idea of prophethood and religiosity. Until next time, have a good day.
I forgot we're going to do it that way. So to add my concluding remarks, I hope you enjoyed this amazing presentation. This is Abdullah Gondal's baby. Like, he's been working on this for quite a while now. You can see the points, how relevant and detailed they are, not just from neuroscience, but also from the seerah, from the hadith, from the Quran, particular examples. Honestly, Abdullah Gondal is a gem to a movement and if you want to support him as well, still have a chance to leave a super chat. If after this is done, Abdullah, we should get you your own PayPal page as well, because as we all know, or you may not know, how much time it takes to do this. It takes a lot of effort and time. So feel free to send some financial support over there. Abdullah Gondal is also still a student, right? He doesn't have a full-time job, so this will be well, appreciated as well. Really appreciated the insights and everything. And for those of you who are new here, please consider joining the channel and also subscribing. Subscribe now, and thank you. Let's see the final clip.
God came down on Michael and forced him to consummate with Christiana. I mean, it was a terrible, strange act of God. He did an astonishing thing that I was astonished, and so was Michael.
Michael had made no mention of sleeping with his son's wife. I got the feeling this was a story I wasn't supposed to hear. And when Michael found out I knew, he asked me for an opportunity to explain just how God had made it happen.
I stood up like this, and suddenly I was forced down on the floor, and I had to get down. I was down just about like this, and I was in pain, and all I could do was groan. All I could do was kind of rock. And I started seeing that the consummation with Christiana was imminent, and I was going to be, I was going to have to do that.
I was just laying awake and I was thinking about coming over here. And I said to Father, I said, when I go over there, if Michael invites me in, I will ask for the consummation tonight.
So was it just a single occasion, this literal physical consummation?
No, it wasn't.
But you consummated more than once?
Yes, yes. Yes.
Why is it necessary to consummate more than once?
Could you not answer that question yourself? When you marry a wife, do you consummate only once? Does she stop being married to you after your wedding day?
The world, they would look at it a different way. You know, they would just see that an affair happened or something. But that's not what happened.
I finally understood why so many can't wait for the end of the world, and the bodily ascent to heaven that Michael has promised. The last 7 years has left many broken, crushed by what Michael has put them through. He agreed to let us return in the few months left to see what the end of the prophecy would bring.